IB Nation, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown Podcast. It is Friday, which means it is Friday Free-For-All time. You've got Ryan Roberts here. You've got Brian Driscoll here. I almost didn't recognize him at first with his hat frontwards, so I'm digging it. But, Brian, we're going to get into the mailbag. We've already got over 20 questions started, a lot more coming in. We haven't started yet. But I want to start off, obviously, with the big news that Ohio State defensive end Javontae Jean-Baptiste, is I believe how is the correct way of saying it, a native of New Jersey who went to Bergen Catholic, a school that Notre Dame fans are quite familiar with, has decided to head to Notre Dame and will transfer to Notre Dame. Ryan, I think this is a very important pickup for Notre Dame. Let's just give a little bit of a backstory here, just real quick, not a ton. Remember about a week or so ago, I made a comment that there was another player visiting that we couldn't comment on? This was him. So this was a situation where Notre Dame was kind of looking at Javontae Jean-Baptiste and Byron Vaughns. And essentially what they decided on is to push for Jean-Baptiste because he's the guy that projects more as a big end, the defensive end position, so that people understand the terms. At Notre Dame, how they call it basically is they have defensive end, which is the big end, viper, which is the weak side end, 3 technique, and a nose. And they project him to be a defensive end. And Vaughns is more of a viper, but more of a pure viper. And as we have said for weeks, Notre Dame really likes its depth chart at viper. I know they lost Foskey, and I know there's a lot of uncertainty. But with Jordan Patelho, Josh Burnham, Junior Tuihalamaka, and some other players that could potentially play there, they really like that. The big end position was more of the question mark, and then finding potentially an interior guy. So as we've been saying for a while, that's the positions that they had been focusing, not on Viper. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, Ryan, looks a bit like a Viper based on what has played Viper at Notre Dame in recent years. But I think that's more of just that's what Foskey was in this defense, not necessarily what they're looking for. They're projecting him to play that defensive end position, which is more of a power position and fits his game well. So that's a little bit of the backstory on that. I mean, this is something he entered the portal. Notre Dame got involved early. Al Washington has obviously a relationship with this young man, high academic kid. I reached out to some of my sources at Ohio State who said this is a great kid. Like, yeah, football player and all that, but like this is a great kid, great student, would fit in very well at Notre Dame. And honestly, Ryan, one of the things is he's kind of been buried behind a really loaded defensive end depth chart the last couple of years, but still has had pretty good production. I think finished tied for 4th in sacks this year at Ohio State, and he was only 1 behind the guy that led the team. There's 2 guys with 4.5, 1 with 4, and then he had 3.5. And his success rate in according to Pro Football Focus as a pass rusher, his win rate was higher than what Isaiah Foskey's was and was comparable to what Will Anderson's was last year. He just didn't play a lot of snaps, had like 131 snaps. So he was a regular member of a very deep end rotation. He just wasn't the guy. But his production was good, and his production per snap was very good the last 2 years. Now at Notre Dame, he'll transition to that big end position, Ryan, and it just gives them another depth piece with a lot of experience and some skills. So just first of all, general thoughts about him before we dive into his specific skill set here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at his background, like you said, coming out of Bergen Catholic, he was actually recruited as a linebacker originally coming out, right? And I think that a lot of those same traits that you see from what made him a pretty highly coveted kid, obviously ending up at Ohio State, you see on film still. And not to get too much in the specifics, but I think that it's an interesting fit, Brian, because we've talked about this, right? I didn't want Notre Dame to really bring in a true Viper type because I want to see Jordan Patelho play because I think they had Joshua Burnham, Aiden Gobira. That mix, I think, could be a very productive unit for Notre Dame. But the spot that I need more production out of, and, let's see what happens with Riley Mills positionally, is the big end position. And I think that hearing that Javontae Jean-Baptiste is being projected as that big end is a really interesting compliment to what you have because he has been very productive. I mean, over 17% win rates on PFF, just for people that aren't, don't stick to those stats too much. It's a really good rate, man. It's really good. I mean,
Foskey was in the 14s the last 2 years, by the way.
Exactly. And in limited opportunities, like you said, sure. But I mean, when he's been on the field, he's been a productive football player. And the other thing is that he's going to be a 6-year senior, right? So you come into this season now with a additional veteran leadership and a guy that's been productive in the snaps that he's gotten. So I know from an NFL standpoint, coming into the year back in the spring, he had a draftable grade. It was a late round draftable grade, but he had a draftable grade despite being a backup because you see the athleticism that he has, but you also see that he has a verified almost 80-inch wingspan. Like he's a long, long dude. So that length, experience, I mean, for people that won't watch Ohio State a ton, Ohio State doesn't really have a Viper big end type of situation, right? Like they're kind of just standard defensive ends. They don't really flip and flop guys a ton, right?
Not a ton, yeah.
Yeah. So a guy that's had experience kind of playing on both sides of the line, a guy that has played a lot of football over there for the last couple of years, has been productive doing that and has played at a high level. I think that we can't talk enough about that, right? Like he's played at Ohio State. He's played in some big football games, obviously, during the course of his career. So I think it's a low-risk addition, like maybe he isn't a star for Notre Dame, but at worst, he gives you valuable depth and a valuable football player for this team.
Ron, I think the thing about it too, some people have asked, isn't he a natural replacement for Foskey? And like, no, the natural replacements for Foskey for Notre Dame are already on the roster. I think the thing that people have to understand is just because they had Isaiah Foskey playing that role the last 2 years, because that's where you needed him, doesn't mean that's necessarily how they envision that position being in the future. Now, if you'd got Keon Keeley, you'd have probably continued that, unless Keon outgrew it. And because I think Keon could eventually play big end in the right defense. Because again, how the big end is used is different depending on the player. They used Khalid Kareem and Adi Ogundeji a little bit different. And they used Adi Ogundeji a lot different than how they used Myron Tungavaloa. And they used Myron Tungavaloa and Riley Mills a little bit similar, which was a little bit of an issue for me. But the Riley Mills thing is interesting, Ryan, because the reality is Notre Dame has two big question marks on the defensive line prior to today. Defensive end and defensive tackle, 3 technique. The reality is right now you project the best player on the roster at both of those positions is Riley Mills.
Right.
And the problem is, and this is the debate you and I had the other day, which I thought was a good one, is we could debate whether or not Riley's a better 3 technique or a big end. But my question to you was, but if you move him, who plays big end?
Right.
Like, I don't know if Nana Osafo-Mensah, who's a very important player to Notre Dame, is a guy that you want to all of a sudden be the guy that's playing 40, 50 snaps. Now, if Nana beats out Javontae Jean-Baptiste, great. Then he's obviously upped his game and he's ready to play. But even then, you've got another body along with Alexander Ahrensberger that you can kind of rotate those 3 guys through to where you can kind of tailor how you use each of them to their strengths. I don't know if either of the guys – I think the guy with the highest ceiling is Alexander Ahrensberger. I just don't know where he is from a development standpoint.
Sure.
But the point is, you get this young man, now you feel good about that defensive end depth, right? Whether it's Nana that ends up winning the starting job, whether it's Jean-Baptiste that wins the job, whether Ahrensberger has a breakout off season and he wins the job, whether Tyson Ford maybe stays outside and he wins the job, maybe maybe Boubacar comes in and is way more advanced than we thought, like Benjamin Morrison, like Joe Alt, right? We thought those guys would need a little bit of time. Maybe something like that happens, but the point is, Ryan, with Jean-Baptiste, the 2 returners, plus Armel Mukam, Boubacar, Brendan Vernon, you feel like you have now the comfort level there and the numbers and the talent there and the length there that you feel a little bit better about moving Riley Mills inside on more of a full-time basis. Doesn't mean Riley can't still have some situations where he's playing out there. No. But now you can feel better about saying, hey, let's move Riley back inside. Let's maybe turn him into a really disruptive 3 technique, and we feel good about being there. So now it solidifies, in my opinion, 2 positions by getting Jean-Baptiste, because you're going to be able to make a more permanent move with Riley Mills inside, where I don't know if you could have permanently moved him. I think you'd have had to do what you did this year, which is play him a little bit both, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think they want Riley inside. We saw him inside in the bowl game. But then they would go to their 3-man fronts. They ran some odd man fronts in the bowl game, as we saw, where they'd kind of bump them out. And we saw that against USC, obviously, where he will play over the tackle still some. But that was as a 3 technique bumping out, because they had, remember, Jason Adamiola didn't play, and they had to move him inside to replace him. Well, then that left the big end position a little bit exposed in those 2 games, if we're going to be honest about it. So I think that's another aspect where this commitment picks up. Is like, are we going to sit there and say, oh man, this guy's going to give you all the production that Isaiah Foskey had, because look at his win rate in the pass rush game. Well, maybe he's not a guy who can carry that 17% win rate over to 45 snaps a game. Like I've said this about Howard Cross. When you go back and look at his career, when Howard Cross can play about 25 to 30 snaps a game, he's hard to block.
Yes.
But when you play him 40-plus snaps a game, he wears down pretty quickly because he's only 275 pounds. In an ideal world, you could keep Howard Cross as part of a rotation where he plays less snaps, which makes him more dynamic in a smaller amount of reps. Maybe that's how Baptiste is. And that's why maybe the staff has to keep him as part of a rotation. Maybe he can project it to 40, 45 snaps. I don't know the answers to that, Ryan, because we've never seen him play that much.
Sure.
But what I know is, to your point, we have seen him at a high level play in a system where he was part of a very talented edge rotation, and when he was on the field, he was productive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're adding to this. At the minimum, that's what you're adding to this depth chart, and that's important because, to be honest with you, they've swung and missed a lot on the defensive line this year, if we're being honest. And it was important that they got a win in this situation, and Jean-Baptiste is a win in this situation.
I mean, he's definitely a win because, like I said, I think he's a low risk player, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if he isn't a substantial producer at the end of the season, he's only here for 1 year, right? And I know that sounds kind of mean for a second, but like this is a 1-year rental for a kid that's going to go try to play in the NFL and had, again, late round draftable grades. So he's going to be probably in one of the All-Star games next year, and he's trying to have the 1 year of great production heading into the NFL. So you see that, and I say again, it's going to be a 6-year senior, respected kid, like you said, by everyone around the program, good student, good person. And he also is going to bring in, I mean, you mentioned him already, but Boubacar Traore, Brendan Vernon, those types are going to be able to be around a guy like that has been there, done that, been through the fire, seen the big games, and going to be able to help them along, like a Nano Asafo-Mensah will be able to do as well. Like those guys will kind of be able to really tutor those younger guys kind of outside of just his impact on the football field. So I think from every vantage point, man, I can't really find a drawback to this. I think that you just have to have the right expectations. I think that Javontae Jean-Baptiste is going to be a good, productive football player in whatever role that he is given for Notre Dame. You should not expect him to be Isaiah Foskey, because if you're going to do that, you're going to set him up for failure. You're going to set yourself up to failure. So you're going to set the whole team up for failure. What you're going to get out of this kid, though, is veteran leadership, a good football player, a player that's going to be productive for the snaps he's given. And again, he's a 6-year senior that's been around the block a couple times. So I really don't see any drawback to this one. I think it's going to be rock solid. I love your point about Riley Mills, because now if you are a team that wants to play a little more 3-man front, using Riley as that end in a 3-man front and then moving inside as a defensive tackle as a 3 technique when you go to more 4-man stuff, I think that you can get a lot out of him in that regard, and you strengthen your interior, especially from a disruption perspective. So you strengthen 2 positions. You got a good football player who is a pretty, he's going to at worst be a solid contributor. Like I just don't think there's a lot of risk to this move, and I think that Javontae Jean-Baptiste, for what we've seen on the field at Ohio State, was a good football player. And anytime you add more good football players to the room, I mean, what are we going to complain about?
Ryan, and real quick too, is we talked about his pass rush numbers. His run stop numbers were almost identical to Isaiah Foskey's as well, and they were about 2 to 3 points higher than Riley Mills, which is a pretty big jump. So he was a sound all around player last year. His run stop numbers, according to Pro Football Focus, his run stop percentage, it's on a per snap basis. It's like a run stop is, I think it's like you either tackle for loss or a stuff at the line of scrimmage, or you hold a guy within 2 yards, and that's where you make the play.
Correct.
His run stop rate was also higher than the other 2 big time ends that they had last year too. It was higher than, I believe, Zach Harrison's, and it was higher than Jack Sawyer's. So Javontae Jean-Baptiste was at 6.5. Zach Harrison was at 5.5. Jack Sawyer was at 6.0. Michael Hall Jr. is an inside guy with 6.0. And JT Tuimoloau was 6.7. Jean-Baptiste was 6.5. And if you look at Isaiah Foskey last year, he was 6.7. So it was very similar to what Isaiah Foskey was last year. So Just wanted to kind of point that out as well to what his number was. So you're also getting a guy that has shown an ability to be a productive run player for the snaps he's played. Now, at 250, 255 pounds, can he be a guy that can do that for an extra 15, 20 snaps a game? We'll see. That's
right.
A question mark. But at least we know for the snaps that he played, and he played over 200 snaps this season, like I said, as part of a rotation. He was able to kind of give you that. So,
well, Brian, can I also say, when we first heard about Javontae Jean-Baptiste entering the portal, my initial thought was, are they going to bring him in to play Viper? And then when you sit down and watch the film, he plays a lot more like a big end than a Viper. So it kind of makes sense that that's kind of where the staff is projecting him to play, because originally I thought Viper, but I think it makes a lot of sense to fit in that big end room.
Let's talk about his skill set specifically, Ryan. First thing you're going to notice about this young man is he is all kinds of long. I mean, you've said you've heard reports that he's an 80-plus wingspan guy, Ryan. Is that what you said to me? Or
he's a nearly 80-inch. I have it in front of me somewhere. I believe he was like 79 and some change.
That's really long.
Yeah.
That's really long.
I have it right here. So the officials on him in this last spring were 6'4" and 6'8", so right around 6'5", 248, 33.5-inch arms. He had a 79 and 3/4-inch wingspan.
That's very long.
Yeah.
If you're near 80, you're long. He's got a little bit of a narrow body, right, which is one of my concerns. And I'm curious to see how they're going to use the big end, but a lot of times that big end is matched up against a tight end or a tackle. You're not getting as many double team situations as you are playing three techniques. So I'm not as concerned about it there, the way that they use it. I think he can also be a guy that can play in sort of five technique situations as well when you're playing in three-man fronts. So size-wise, Ryan, he's a little narrow, but he's got great length. It's hard to – and the other thing, the reason the length is important, because it's hard for you to get on my body if I know how to use my hands. And, Ryan, that's something that we both talked about before the show when we were discussing each other is he's got really good hands. Yes. He's natural block. He's got some natural ability as a block destructor. He's got good technique as a block destructor. He's not like a powerful guy, like he's just going to throw guys around. He's got really heavy hands. And he's really good at getting off blocks. I think that is something that's very important for that big end. And that's the thing to me that made me say, okay, this guy can project as a big end because he's got really good natural strength, really strong hands. And he uses his hands very well to keep people off his body and to get off blocks and get to the football.
Well, and I think the length and the heavy hands are really important, right, in that role, because that was the first thing I noticed about him, because the first few reps I saw of Javonte were actually of him in the run game, not as a pass rusher. And I also thought that he read blocks really well. Like there were some times where, you were working against a down block and then here comes someone trying to kick you out. And I feel like he has pretty good spatial awareness. He kind of sees the game, I think, at a good level, and he was able to read the blocks to be in proper position. But to your point, Brian, I think he has a good strike. He's able to gain extension, and then when he gains extension, he's got that 33.5-inch arm, right? So he's able to get guys off of his body. And I think that the hand usage really pops not only in the run game, but also as a pass rusher. I know people hear me say outside track a ton as a pass rusher. And what I mean by outside track is the upfield shoulder of a tackle. So it's around the arc. And most guys win around the arc with bends, right? They're able to get to that upfield shoulder and they're able to dip, and then they have kind of flexible ankles and hips to really run that track. Javonte is able to win the outside track, but not in that regard. He wins because he has really good hands at the top of the arc. You see the double swipe, you see getting hands off of you, and then he's able to just kind of continue his momentum. So he's not the bendiest guy of all time, but he actually wins on the outside track or running the hoop a decent amount for a guy that I wouldn't say is like the most bendy guy of all time. So I think that hand usage, to your point, Brian, and the length shows up as a pass rusher in the run game as well, because he's able to kind of cover a decent amount of ground. And the other thing about in the run game that I noticed is I think that tackle radius really shows up, because I personally didn't see him miss any tackles in the couple games that I watched. So I think he's a pretty short tackler. I think he's got a big tackle radius. And I think he really understands how to use his length and use his hands, both in the run game and the pass game, to be a good football player.
One thing I see from him too, Ryan, is you mentioned he's not a real laterally quick guy. I really like the burst off the line. I think he actually will fit this defense really well as a pass rusher. I think he's got a lot of Adi Ogundeji in him, if I'm going to be honest with you. If I'm looking at all the Notre Dame players the last, 5, 6, 7 years when this kind of rebuild and turnaround happened, the guy that stands out the most for people who want comps is Adi. Great length, little narrow frame, right? But Adi was able to, because I thought Adi was going to put on more weight, and he never did. Adi Takumba Ogundeji is who I'm referring to there. And he, a little bit narrow shoulders, but, or not narrow shoulders, no, a little bit narrow butt, a little bit narrow hips, not a real thick guy like Khalid Kareem was, like some other guys that played that position. So we've seen what a body type like his looks like in this defense if they keep it somewhat similar to what it has been in the past. And I don't think Marcus Freeman's defense was necessarily exponentially different for how it used the big end compared to how Clark Lee did. And honestly, we haven't really seen them turn a guy loose as an edge rusher from that spot. And so I don't know if that's necessarily something they're looking for. I think they want their pass rush to come up from the middle to the Viper and then with linebacker pressures. If they can get a guy that can provide a little bit more pass rush from the big end, I think let me rephrase. If they try to allow the big ends to play a little bit more as pass rushers, I think that's something that could help. I also think, Ryan, he brings a little bit of, you look at who could potentially replace Justin Ademiola's role on third down. I think Jordan Botelho is probably the guy right now that I'm looking at as possibly being that, maybe a Josh Burnham, but I could see him playing a little bit of that role as well. When they would use Justin inside, I could see him doing a little bit of that as well. Because Justin also wasn't the most flip your hips and kind of guy. He was a motor guy, quick first step and all that kind of stuff. So that's another role that he could potentially play, although I don't think that's necessarily the primary role that they're looking for him to play in this offense or in this defense.
And I think what you saw from Jean-Baptiste at Ohio State is, like I said before, he kind of played on both sides of the ball a little bit, right? Like he wasn't just a left end in their system. He wasn't just a right end. He kind of played a little bit of both. And I think that you saw that, again, from a body type perspective, initially I thought he was a Viper, right? Like I thought that's what he looked like. But you saw the work against the run that was a lot better than what I originally anticipated. It was a lot of, good understanding of gap integrity, setting the edge, being physical with your hands. So I think that he is a player, to your point, Brian, that can be a versatile piece, right? And even if he's a guy that is a mostly outside track guy as a rusher, again, that helps out a guy like a Riley Mills, who I don't think Riley's a guy that's going to get home a ton as a pure edge rusher. But in passing situations, him inside a 3-tech working against guards with the length and quickness he has compared to interior offensive linemen, I think that you now have a lot more variety as a pass rush team with a Javontae Jean-Baptiste, because you have now the more athletic, bendy types of the Jordan Botelhos and the Aiden Gabiras and the Joshua Burnhams. And now you have the ability to move Riley Mills more inside on definite pass situations at worst. But then you also have, in my opinion, Nano Asaf-Mensah, I think, is a really good edge setter, right? Like he plays hard, he plays with good violence and a nice motor, but he's not a guy that I think is going to be a super productive pass rusher. Like I just don't know if that's ever going to be his role. Javontae Jean-Baptiste as that big end on a 4-down, like if they have a 4-down alignment as in a pass rush, a pass rush opportunity, I think that he can win from that outside track. I think he can give you more juice as a pass rusher than like a Nana can, or even what a Riley Mills would do as a traditional defensive end in a 4-man front. So I think that it's a no-lose situation, man. Like I think that, again, this isn't like a boomer bust. This isn't like you're taking a young kid who was a former 5-star that if he doesn't play well, he's out of here in a year, right? Javontae Jean-Baptiste has been there. He's done that. He's here for a year. He's trying to boost his draft stock. He's trying to get the full scope of playing time. And I think that it's a really good just opportunity for him.
I think that's important to talk about with him and Thomas Harper.
Yes.
Because neither of these guys are like, look, could he come in and you're like, wow, they were them not giving him a shot at Ohio State kept him from showing this great first round ability. I guess anything's possible, right? Like, but that's not what you're bringing him in to do. Like, that's the thing to understand. You're not bringing him in here to replace Isaiah Foskey's production. You're bringing him in here to be part of a defensive line that can be a championship caliber group. That's the key. And so he's not going to come in my view, play 60 snaps a game, have 15 tackles for loss, 10 sacks, do all those type of things. He's not that guy. No. Now, do I think that they want his production to be good and to be maybe like 8, 9 tackles for loss, 4 or 5 sacks? Yeah, I think that's kind of what they're looking for from him, because that's what he did at Ohio State in far fewer snaps than what I think he's going to play this year, because he averaged, I think, a little less than 20 snaps per game, which because they played a really heavy rotation at Ohio State. That's the thing to people have to understand is when you look at Ohio State's defensive end position, their leading guy in snaps was JT Tuiamaloa. I don't know if I'm saying that right. He had 504, and then Zach Harrison had 484. That was in 13 games. If you look at Notre Dame this year and you look at their snap distribution, I mean, Isaiah Foskey played 563 snaps. Justin Amiel had 485, and then Riley Mills played 415. The number 3 guy at Ohio State at defensive end was 329. You know, so you had a lot more of a rotation there, to be completely honest with you, than what you saw. He played 250 snaps, so just under 20 snaps a game. So you saw a little bit more of a rotation there. You'd see Ohio State go to some nickel at times on third down and take the big end out at times, or take one of the interior guys out at times. So just understand what he's doing. But I think that's important for this defense, Ryan, because I don't think Notre Dame needs here's my issue with Byron Vaughns, and this is something you and I talked about. Byron Vaughns, to me, probably brings a higher ceiling, just as a pure player.
Yep.
But he's more raw. He's more of an unknown. I watched him against Bama, and athletically, he could compete against Bama. Technically, he couldn't.
Yes.
And so, he has a year left. You have a lot of teaching to do with him. And he projects more to position that you already feel good about as a staff. Now, people can disagree with that. Like, I see people saying, like, oh, he's got a, they need another Viper. Okay, that's fair. I mean, if you think that, you think that. But I'm just telling you, the staff really likes where they're at with Viper. And the only way they were going to bring a Viper in is if that guy was a dude, right? Like an absolute dude. It's someone who is on Isaiah Foskey's level as a player. That guy wasn't out there. And if he was out there, he wasn't coming to Notre Dame.
Sure.
And so, you look at it, Ryan, to me is understand what these roles are. Same with Thomas Harper. They weren't bringing Thomas Harper in to be, okay, we got Cam Hart, who we think can be an All-American. We've got Benjamin Morrison, and we're bringing you to be an All-American. I don't think they're going to look at him the same way that they did Brandon Joseph, for example. How'd that turn out?
Right.
They're saying these guys are coming in, and they are going to be – we know the floor. We know that at the very least we know what we're going to get from Thomas Harper, and it's pretty good. And it fits a niche. We know the floor of what we're going to get from Javontae Jean-Baptiste, and it's pretty good. It's going to fit a niche. If they can play beyond that, then great. Because here's the thing you have to understand is Notre Dame already has a lot of high-ceiling, unproven, raw guys already on the roster. So why waste time not waste time. Why take a chance on Byron Vaughns when I just rather say coach up Josh Burnham?
Right. Coach
up Tyson Ford, coach up, the guy Aiden Gobira and the guys you already have on your roster, Jason Onye. And so that's the deal is you're looking at it, right? Is you've got to get that kind of guy because there are some big names on the market at defensive line, but does anybody think that do you remember where Jordan Birch is from, the kid from South Carolina? I'm going to look up real quick. He's a Southeastern.
He's a Southeastern kid. He's definitely
I think he's an in-state kid. He's going to Oregon.
Right.
A kid from South Carolina is going to Oregon. Why? You're not getting that kid. Right. So that guy was not on the market for Notre Dame. And I think the other thing too is these kids are coming, and I think you made a statement. They're looking to improve their draft stock. They're going to be hungry.
Yes.
My issue with Brandon Joseph is he never played hungry. He never played like he really wanted to be here and do something. And once Notre Dame lost a couple games early, it's kind of like you just never got the same Brandon Joseph. These kids are going to come in my opinion, and be hungrier.
Yeah.
I think that's important. So I wasn't really concerned about getting a high ceiling. Like Byron Vaughns has some upside, but you and I talked about this. I was always nervous about that's a raw dude, and you were on board with me on that, I think, Ryan.
Yeah.
And do you really want to take a chance on a kid like that, or do you want to bring in a kid with a much higher floor and has a lot more positional flexibility? And that's why they went the direction of, because it was going to be one or the other. And we're going to take both. They're going to take one or the other. And that's one of the several factors that kind of, played into the idea of him being the guy that they would target.
I think the positional flexibility is a big thing that we didn't even hit on as much because, we're talking about Javontae Jean-Baptiste as being a big end in their system, and that's where, he's being projected. But if he needs to play Viper, he can, right? Because he has enough skill set to be able to play that in a pinch. Byron Vaughn's, in your comparison, I have the verified on him from last spring. He was 6'5", with 35 and 7/8 inch arms, crazy length. But he's only 228 pounds, right? He's not a guy that's ever going to be able to play big ends. He's going to be a Viper.
Are you concerned at all that his weight has continued to go down and down and down?
Isn't it weird?
He was 245 at Texas. Then he was like 230, 235 his first year at Utah State. Then he was down on the roster this year, 225. And I'm like, okay, that's a little weird.
I think Texas may have been a little lying.
Well, if you look at him early on, though, at Texas, if you go back and watch those clips, he was beefed up, but he wasn't explosive. He didn't have any explosiveness. And I think was he 245 or not? He looked a little, let's just say he looked a little chunkier at Texas than he did at Utah State.
Yeah.
But that concerns me. A guy that put on 15 pounds and lost a little bit of his burst because he actually played a little bit in 2019 for them. And so I like this pickup. Is this the kind of pickup, and is Thomas Harper the kind of pickup that's going to be sexy and be the Sam Hartman type of pickup for the defense? No, it's not. That guy to me would have been Braden Fisk for me.
Yes.
And they missed. They missed on him. And there's no other way to say it, right? There's no spin on that one.
Yep.
Now, here's the thing about Braden Fisk. I think they still would have taken this kid if they'd have gotten Braden Fisk as well.
Agreed. Because more inside guy.
Right. Yeah. Because then he would have been more, maybe you could have kept Riley Mills at big end, but now you'd have a much more potent end rotation. And then Jean-Baptiste could have maybe taken a little just Natamiola role, in my view. So good pickup, Ryan, and we'll move on to the mailbag next, but this is a good pickup. I think we did kind of got into the film and just the backstory. I don't know how much of a role Al Washington played in this. I haven't been told the role. I'm assuming he played a role in this, if not an important role, since he knew the kid.
Right. He has a relationship, prior relationship, you would think.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the other piece to it too, Ryan, is you had told me the other day, are we able to talk about kind of what you and I talked about the other day about what we were hearing that he was kind of what he was considering as opposed to it was either Notre Dame or
yes.
I didn't. Okay. So he was, Ryan, you and I talked about this. He was contemplating going to the NFL now and they made this decision. So.
Yeah. I mean, I can say that I can say that out loud. It's not a big deal. So, but he was kind of split to my understanding a few days ago. He actually has an NFLPA Bowl invite, which they play out in Pasadena. It's one of the postseason All-Star games. So he was a kid that was on draft radars. Like I said, he had a 7th round grade from NFS last spring. So he's a guy that the NFL has kept close tabs on, and he was pretty split apparently a few days ago. And if he had decided, he probably would be in Pasadena later this month playing at the NFLPA Bowl at worst. So he's a kid, again, that was contemplating the NFL. And I just want people to understand that, right? He was a late round PFA type coming into the year, had some decent production. He's coming to Notre Dame to hopefully go from a late round pick to maybe an early day 3 pick, right? Like that's the escalation that he's trying to get. I don't think he has a ton more upside aside from that,
right?
But be aware that Notre Dame just got a kid that's probably going to play in the NFL for a few years. Most likely. Yeah.
Right. And that's good, right? That's obviously a good thing. So Thomas Harper, I think, is a very similar situation, so if he can have a good year at Notre Dame. So, Ryan, that's it for Javontae Jean-Baptiste. We're going to get in the mailbag next. But before we do, folks, hey, it's never too early to hit that like button, to hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast.
All right,
Ryan, you know what time it is now, right?
It's mailbag time, baby, and we're kicking it off.
I'll go ahead and pull them up. You just read them. So
gotcha.
That way we can split it up a little bit.
From John A1 kicking us off today. In 2021, Andrew Kristofic was able to come in midseason and greatly improve the pass protection. Balance is important, but if Kristofic is the choice, does the interior pass pro improve in 2023?
I thought the interior pass pro was pretty good this year.
Yeah.
I think Josh Luggan and Jarrett Patterson were both pretty good in pass protection this year. So I here's what I'll say to your question, Ryan, and you tell me if you think this is fair. I don't think it improves it, but what I think a return of Andrew Kristofic does is I think what it does is help solidify it. So
stabilize it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And make sure it doesn't take a step back. So if you look at the numbers from Pro Football Focus, and they're somewhat accurate, I think sometimes they miss on things, but it's close to accurate from my evaluation was is Josh Lugg and Jarrett Patterson, neither one of them gave up a sack this year. And they only combined allowed 3 hits on the quarterback. For comparison's sake, Jarrett Patterson allowed 9 quarterback pressures this year. Josh Lugg allowed 12. Joe Alt only allowed 8. Josh Lugg gave up the same number of hits and sacks on the quarterback that Joe Alt did. Now, again, he's going against interior guys. I'm just making the point that they were pretty good there. The guy that had the worst numbers, and I think this also is backed up by film, was Blake Fisher, who gave up some sacks early. I think they have him down for 5 sacks given up. I think there's at least 1 or 2 that I can think of that were more on he was expecting a chip from the back and never got it.
Sure.
And or a tight end and never got it. But, and he got a lot better as the season wore on too. But I think the interior of the line was pretty good. Zeke Correll gave up 1 sack and 4 hits on the quarterback. And a lot of that was early, to be honest with you. So his 1 sack, I think, was against Navy. But his a lot of his hits and pressures were early in the season. So I actually think the interior of the line was pretty good. It was pretty good.
But I think to John's point, I think it will continue to be stabilized. I think that was a good way to put it, right? Because you had this year, Josh Lugg has played offensive tackle in his Notre Dame career, right? So he's pretty comfortable in pass protection, especially when you are playing in more condensed areas. Jared Patterson began his career as a backup left tackle at Notre Dame, right? So he has an offensive tackle background. And I think Andrew Kristofic's the same way. He was a former offensive tackle recruit. He's used to being on an island. So those types, that's why people always ask, why does, Harry Hiestand and, typically like to look at offensive tackle types and then maybe project them inside at points in their career, right? And that's why. I think it's the comfortability in pass protection, as well as longer bodies equal more mass potentially to get on a frame as well, too, right? So I think when you look at an Andrew Kristofic, I think he continues the trend, John, of Jared Patterson has an offensive tackle background, although early in his career. You have a Josh Lugg that has an offensive tackle background throughout his Notre Dame career. And then you're going to have, if Andrew Kristofic wins a starting job next year, you're going to have another kid that has an offensive tackle background.
Mm-hmm. Ryan, I look at it as well too. To this part of it is that I think my concern would be is if Jarrett Patterson was like a mover in the run game, and Kristofic comes in and he's not a mover. I don't know if he won't be as good as Jarrett Patterson, but it's just not a big drop off in my opinion is the key. And then the other thing too is to back up what I had said about Zeke Correll. Zeke Correll in the season, according to Pro Football Focus, gave up 13 pass pressures and 8 including 8 hurries, but he gave up 13 total pressures on the season, which is not an ideal number for a center, but good. It's good. It's just
it's
not
one a
great.
game. It's one a game,
right?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
He gave up 6 of those in the first 4 games, and in the last 9 games, he only gave up 7. So he improved. This is what we had talked about before. He improved a lot as the season went on in pass protection. He really did. He really did. So it just kind of backs up kind of what you and I talked about, Ryan, that he got a lot better as the year went on. So I think if Kristofic is the starter, you feel comfortable with those 2 guys. And if he gets beat out by somebody, then you're like, that person had to be pretty good. That's what we've said. If someone else is going to beat out Andrew Kristofic, that means that guy's pretty good. And exactly. Harry Hiestand feels, because Harry Hiestand likes playing veterans. And in order to beat out a veteran, you got to be definitely better than he is. Now, he'll play a guy who's definitely better. We've seen that.
Because that's best man wins, but it's also creating great depth, right? I mean, I think about it. There was one game this year, I forget which one it was, where Jared Patterson got banged up and Andrew Kristofic comes off the bench, right? It's like kids played football. You feel comfortable with that, right? It's not like a kid's getting thrown in there that has never played a snap of Notre Dame as a backup. That's one – I talked about this past offseason. That was a blessing of disguise in 2021, was the fact that yes, there were injuries on the offensive line. It probably stunted some growth for us from early on for like a guy like Blake Fisher. But you created some depth coming into this season. You did. And guys like Andrew Kristofic got an opportunity, and you felt comfortable that if one of the guards did go down, that Andrew could come in and he could right the ship. He could keep it afloat. It wouldn't just flounder. So I think that Andrew Kristofic is a good football player. I think at worst he presents a lot of swing ability inside. And to your point, if he gets beat out, because again, I don't think everyone gives Kristofic enough credit sometimes, that he's a talented kid. He's a talented kid. Maybe he hasn't quite gotten to where we thought he could potentially get to when he first came out of Pine Richland, but he's a good football player, man.
Well, the thing with Kristofic for me is why I'm not ready to just assume he's going to get beat out by some younger player is I've said this before. I'll stick with it. He was a guy that needed a push, and Jeff Quinn wasn't a pusher. I'm not even like, well, probably a good thing. Jeff Quinn wasn't a guy that really kicked guys in the butt a lot. And that's not a knock on Jeff Quinn. It's just a different coaching style. And it worked for some guys. It worked for Jared Patterson. Like Jared Patterson played well for the most part under him. But for me, Kristofic's one of those guys who just wasn't a natural guy.
Smaller, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that he needed a guy like Coach Easton. So my kind of what I'm looking to see is did Harry get in too late with him to get that out of him? Or now that we're going into year 2 and Andrew's like, hey, because in reality, here's the thing about Andrew Kristofic, though, is he still has 2 years left technically. Yep. So if he steps up and plays to his potential, he can maybe go to the NFL. But he could also come back for another year because him and Zeke Correll technically can come back in 2024 as sixth-year seniors because of COVID.
Right.
And so that's something to consider as well. Does that extra time with Coach Easton get out of Andrew what I think has not been brought out yet? I think there's another – I don't think Andrew Kristofic is who he is, which is not normal for a senior.
Right.
But that's kind of the reality of the fact that you didn't have a great coaching before, and now you do. There is going to be more veterans taking that leap than we've seen in the past.
Right.
And that's why I think with Zeke Correll to a degree, but also with Andrew Kristofic, because I think Zeke's jump kind of happened during the year. I think his improvement happened during the year. And Andrew's, hopefully comes this offseason. And if it does, Notre Dame's going to be in pretty good shape there.
Absolutely.
Good question, John.
We had a super chat from Charlie Weiss's last belt loop. Thank you, Charlie. Love seeing Notre Dame hunting in the portal. Do you expect any other portal ads? I love that Freeman gets it, sees the reality, unlike the previous coach.
I don't think Brian Kelly would have completely ignored the portal the way that it is now. Look, the portal reality is new. It wasn't like this under Brian Kelly. And
it's becoming a necessity
and it wasn't that way for Kelly. So, look, I'm all for being critical of Kelly for things he did, but this isn't really one that I'm going to hammer Kelly for because they did a decent job with grad transfers, in my opinion, and a couple undergrads. I mean, you go back to Cody Riggs. Just off the top of my head, I'm trying to think of some guys that came in, but like Cody Riggs.
He's a good player, man. Yeah. I love Cody Riggs.
And remember, that ended up being huge, too, because he came in the year 2014 – or was it 2014 where I'm trying to remember that was the year that Kavari Russell got suspended. And so had Cody Riggs not showed up, and him and Cole Luke proved to be a pretty good corner rotation until late in the year when Cody got hurt. I remember he had that foot injury, so he didn't, I don't think he played against USC, but he missed some games late. But him and Cole Luke proved to be a pretty good corner tandem. Cole Luke was really good that first year under Van Gorder, and he just regressed every year because that's just what Van Gorder did with people is they regressed under him. But if you don't get Cody Riggs from Florida, that's a big loss. I mean, that's a big hole, I mean. Alohi Gilman was an undergrad transfer. He was a really important player. I mean, I don't know if your defense – I don't know if you're a playoff team in 2018 without Alohi Gilman. I'm being – you say, well, one guy shouldn't make that – there's a couple games I can point to. I don't know if you beat that team if Alohi Gilman's not your starting safety. And go to the Michigan game. Remember that big breakup he had on the tight end in the end zone? Mm-hmm. And I think Michigan ended up settling for a field goal on that drive, I believe. Yeah. And, he made the Vanderbilt strip at the goal line. And he was a leader. He was without question the emotional leader of that team, of that defense, in my opinion. Great and then, of course, Ben Skoranek was a guy that they went out and got.
I was going to say 2020, transfer. Nick McLeod too, right?
Yeah, Nick McLeod in 2020, Jack Cohn in 2021. So the portal isn't today what it was under Brian Kelly. And And Marcus Freeman's kind of doing what Brian Kelly did because of the school. Who are all these kids they've got? They're all grad transfers.
Yep.
And he's not out there getting freshmen and sophomore. I mean, they've tried, but they haven't been able to get those guys. And look, would they have landed the guys they got if Brian Kelly's here? That's debatable.
Sure.
But I don't want to hammer Kelly for something that I don't think is fair to hammer him for, because the portal has changed dramatically since Brian Kelly left. I mean,
in just a year, man, it's changed so much.
I mean, this existed his last year at Notre Dame, but it was just a different. It's just this last calendar year is just, it's turned into some monster with
the NIL implications, with the transfer portal mix, that's like, it's bolstered. It's because now kids are understanding that, like, if I leave, I might be able to get a payday at a different school, right? Like, that's kind of what's happened. So
So yeah, I don't want to hammer Kelly for that one, because I don't think that's fair. Now, would he have screwed it up? Maybe, but I don't know. We don't know how Kelly would have handled it. All I know is at LSU, he's hitting the portal hard.
Yes, he is.
Now, he would have had to do it differently at Notre Dame. But I just, look, it's Ryan. Everybody knows I don't like Brian Kelly personally. But what I don't want to do is just be that show that hammers him just because. If we're going to hammer him, it's because it's something that we legitimately believe was a reason. And I just don't think that, because the type of transfers he would have had to get at Notre Dame during his tenure, they weren't getting them not because he didn't want them, because the school wouldn't bring him in.
For sure.
And Marcus Freeman's dealing with that same battle. And the guys he got this offseason are all grad transfers, and that's something Notre Dame got a grad transfer quarterback 2 years ago. I mean, that's not a new thing. Now, I don't know if they would have got someone as good as Sam Hartman this year if Brian goes here. That's an unknown. I have my doubts, but that's a different conversation for a different day. They've gotten transfer DBs before, grad DBs before, Cody Riggs, Nick McLeod, as you mentioned. They've gotten graduate defensive linemen under him, right? I mean, we've seen that before. So I just don't want to hammer him just to hammer him. But there's plenty of things to hammer him for that we don't need to make, for that. Go ahead, Rye.
For sure. I mean, for Charlie, for the first part of Charlie's question, though, I know that there's been some more wide receiver interest out there on the portal for Notre Dame. I know we've talked about maybe an interior defensive lineman. Do you think that there's other guys? Well, not other guys, but do you think that they'll still be active, I guess, moving forward in the portal?
Say that last part again.
Do you think they'll still be active trying to continue to recruit the portal?
Yeah, I think they're going to continue to recruit the portal like this.
Yes.
Find that piece that we're missing and supplement. Marcus Freeman has said before, we are going to be a high school recruiting dominant team. That's partly his strategy. He wants guys that are buying in. It's also part reality of, we forget the whole trouble of getting kids into school part. Even if the school lowers its standards, which they need to do, you're still going to have a hard time getting the high impact players you're still going to have a hard time from getting Anthony Lucas, because the same things that mattered to him going to Texas A&M and why he picked Texas A&M are the same reasons he's picking USC. And Notre Dame's not going to change that, nor should they. And I love the fact that I was told very early on from multiple sources very close to inside the program that when it comes to this quarterback transfer, when the window opens up and these kids jump in and we start talking to them, we're going to tell them right away, NIL is not something we're going to discuss with you. We'll tell you how our NIL program works, but we're not going to have conversations about what you want, because if that's what's going to factor into your decision to come here, then that's not a fit for us. And from what I was told is once they started having conversations with Sam Hartman when he got in the portal, it was something where it wasn't something he was talking about. And it was Notre Dame made their case and said, hey, this is not going to be a conversation. Sam Hartman was like, that's not why I'm leaving. I'm not leaving Wake Forest for a payday. I'm trying to win a championship, and I'm trying to go somewhere that I can develop my game and get ready for the next level, because his payday is going to be in the National Football League is what he's looking for.
No doubt.
And so you're gonna need to continue to find guys like that, right? Like Jean-Baptiste has got his own NIL stuff going on. He does on his Twitter, you see social media influencer, right? Like he's got these different.
He's got like a video game thing going on.
And some energy drink thing he's got, so he's doing his own thing wherever he goes. And I love that. And that's why a kid like that's going to fit at Notre Dame.
Wait, kids do it the right way? Is that all about?
Imagine that, right?
Imagine that.
That's crazy. Yeah, imagine that.
Well, I mean, we never even talked about that as much, Brian, but it's like, you don't think Sam Hartman could have gotten a nice upfront payday by a team in the portal? Like, yeah,
Exactly. So to me, Ryan, I think they're going to always look for those kind of kids because those kids are going to come in with a little bit more buy-in. And I think that's the lesson that Notre Dame learned a little bit with some other transfers was the buy-in really there? And so I think they're also going to err on the side of if we're going to bring a kid in, he better be at a position where we need another body, or he's got to be significantly better than the kids we have. So you're not going to see the Caden Maddens anymore. Like guard, here's an example. I've been told on good authority that Notre Dame has been evaluating guards in the portal because if there's a guy that's significantly better than the guys they have, they'll talk to him. The problem is those guys just aren't there right now. And so, because they like what they have. So every staff should be looking at the portals like, is there a guy that's just better than what we have? Like, you've heard me say this, right, Ryan? I'm not really a guy that feels they need to go into the portal for another receiver. But if J. Michael Sturdivant wanted to come, I'd be interested in him. You know what I mean? Because he is a kid that, to me, is in that upper echelon of talent relative to what's on the roster.
That's why brings something different.
Right.
Brings something different.
And he's got some experience. He's got, another year of eligibility left. And that's why I wasn't super thrilled about C.J. Williams, because I don't know that C.J. Williams brings something that you don't already have.
100%.
And J. Michael Sturdivant, too, brings a different style. He is a fast, vertical player. They don't really have a lot of that on the roster right now, other than the freshmen.
Yes.
Like Braylon, he's a 3 years older than Braylon James is what I think J. Michael Sturdivant is. Is that a fair comparison?
It is.
He's what I hope Braylon James is in 3 years, but I don't think Braylon James is going to be that guy on the level of J. Michael Sturdivant as a freshman. And so that's why you'd look at him. He ended up committing to UCLA. Somebody put in the chat. So that's a nice pickup for UCLA. Really nice pickup for UCLA. And would explain to you why they weren't looking at Caleb Williams either. Because you know who else made that decision? UCLA. And if you don't know this, if you're not on the message board, we did put this on the message board a couple days ago when we put the CJ Williams stuff out is, Notre Dame was on him, but I don't know that there was a complete push for him. I don't think the staff really made the charge for him that Wisconsin did, because I don't think they saw the value in him the way Wisconsin did. But UCLA didn't want him. They didn't push for him. And I think that speaks volumes.
A Cali kid?
Because he'd have gone there in a heartbeat from what I'm told. But why did they not go after him? This is right here, because J. Michael Sturdivant's a better player. And that's more of what they were looking for. And so, I do think, Ryan, that the portal will continue to be something that the Notre Dame coaching staff pushes for, in my opinion. They're just going to have to be smart about it. That's the reality. That's the reality of it, Ryan.
And if they sat back and didn't do their homework constantly, I would have some question marks to me, right? Because I think that the best coaches and the best programs are going to be constantly evaluating.
Always.
Where can I get better? Where can I get better?
Yes.
And if you're not, you're falling behind.
And I like the fact that what I have not heard from this staff is, honestly, I've not heard a lot of complaining when I've talked to coaches or sources or whatever. I don't hear the same complaining about how, we can't do this, we can't do that. They've made their statement. We wish that it was this way. But right now, that's not that way. I'll fight my battles behind the scenes, but I'm not going to go complaining to reporters and other people about how woe is us. This is the rules that we can work with. Let's go find the best possible players we can within that framework.
Yep.
And I love that. So let me explain this to you too, Ryan. Not to you, Ryan, but you know this, to everybody out there. This staff has evaluated a lot of transfer kids. And there was one of the questions in the chat was, why are they so much more secretive with this than they are high school recruiting? Number one, because it's a much shorter window.
Yes.
You don't necessarily want a bunch of stuff to get out there. You don't want everyone to know every DN that you've talked to, because then it looks like if you're trying to tell this kid, hey, you're our number one guy, and then people find out we're talking to 8 other DNs, then it's kind of like, well, even though you're not being dishonest with this kid, he is your number one guy. It's going to come across like you're talking to all these other quarterbacks or defensive ends. And so it could hurt you. And since it is such a small window, it's like, look, just keep this to yourself. This is what we're working on, and we're hoping to close on it. And that's the reality of it. So it actually makes some sense to me to kind of keep that. And then look what happened with Braden Fisk, right? Like that got out there right away. Then all of a sudden everybody knew, okay, if we want to beat Notre Dame, this is what we got to do to get them. And it was one of the factors, not the only factors, one of the factors that I think kind of led to him Now, that wasn't on the staff. He was putting that out there. He was doing interviews with people.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So that's kind of why they've tried to keep this stuff a lot closer to the vest with it.
Because Notre Dame got on Fisk quick, man.
Yeah.
Florida State wasn't one of the first guys on there, and that's just how it happens. Yep.
Right.
To your point.
Right.
We had a question from Tyler Evans, Super Chat. Thank you so much for that, Tyler. With Garrett Riley going to Clemson, how do you think he will fare, and was this a good hire? And I can't wait for Notre Dame to play Clemson next year.
Ryan, you want to – I'll say I think this is a great hire. Now,
it's a great hire.
Couple things for me.
Yep.
Number one, I don't think Garrett Riley was the end-all, be-all designer, decision-maker of the offense at TCU. Sonny Dykes is an offensive mind, and he's very involved in the offense. But he was the true offensive coordinator there. He's a guy that Sonny Dykes took with him from SMU, so clearly Sonny Dykes thinks highly of this guy, of this kid, because he brought him from TCU at a very young age, gave him the same responsibilities at TCU that he had at SMU. And obviously, you know, he's Lincoln Riley's younger brother, so he's going to get a little bit more pub because of that. But I think he did a great job this year, Ryan. I really do. I thought he called a good game in the title game. I didn't love his game plan there, but it was good. There was a lot of missed opportunities, and their quarterback was just couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. And there's not a lot of things in your tool belt that you can go to when your quarterback's unwilling to pull the trigger and inaccurate. I mean, we've talked about that with Tommy Reese. That applies to other guys as well. It's not just defending Tommy Reese because he's a Notre Dame guy or because I like him or whatever the case may be. It's just the reality. As someone who's had to be responsible for calling plays and calling pass plays, especially as a pass game coordinator, when you know your quarterback can't read this or is not handling the pressure well or isn't setting and just can't complete a pass, you're like, I don't really know what to call right here because I don't think he can complete these three calls right here would kill this defense. But he won't throw the ball. And if he does, he's going to miss. You know, so like that post route to Quentin Johnston, that was a great play design. They moved him inside. He's primarily an outside guy. Got him ISO'd on a safety and had the backside defensive backs did exactly what you wanted. I mean, everything went according to plan for what should have been a home run when the game was 17-7. And Max Dugan missed that ball as bad as you can miss that ball. Mm-hmm. That ball should have been out over top of the near seam, and he threw a pick on the backside seam. I don't know what he was doing. What is a coordinator supposed to do there, Ryan? I mean, you know what I mean? So, but by and large, I liked what he did. I don't think he's like this elite guy. Like his offenses aren't as good as what his brother's offenses were, like East Carolina, in my view. But he's really good. And not only that, but the floor there was already really low. I have not, Ryan, we've talked about this. I have not liked Clemson's scheme for years.
Yeah.
Even when Tony was there and they're putting up 40-some points a game, they were putting those points up because they had elite skill talent and they were playing in a crap conference. But they'd still score in the postseason because they had a generational player quarterback, one of the best running backs in the game, elite big-time receivers, and they just got by with just being better than everybody else. And they had an elite defense with Venables there. And so they could take some chances that they can't take now. And so the scheme I haven't liked for years, and Brandon Streeter didn't do much to make it better. It was a little better this year than it was last year, but it wasn't much better. And so now you're getting a guy that is a good young offensive coordinator. Is he elite? Not yet, but he's a good young offensive coordinator. And here's the biggest thing. His system is perfect for Cade Klubnik.
It is. I agree. And you know what else too, Brian? I think that this is a big golf clap for Dabo Swinney because for the longest time, he had consistency at the coordinators. You know, you talk about Tony Elliott, you talk about Brett Venables. He had those guys consistently.
And Elliott and Jeff Scott were groomed by Chad Morris. So then he left for head coaching job. There was that natural consistency. So that even leads to the consistency part. I just wanted to add that part real quick too.
No doubt. But then you get into a situation where you have to abandon that formula because they leave, right? Tony Elliott's going to Virginia. I think that was addition by subtraction, if I'm being completely honest about that one.
And kind of this may be the year you want to take in a head coaching job. From what I'm told, that conversation happened. You know, this might be because Tony Elliott turned down head coaching jobs before. Mm-hmm. This may be the year you want to take that job. So, but then Elliott's out. Brett Venables obviously goes to Oklahoma. And for the first time in a long time, Dabo Swinney has to figure out what the next step of offensive and defensive coordinator is, right? And he hires from within. He brings up a couple of his guys. And first year,
doesn't really pan out that well. I wasn't really thrilled by what Brandon Streeter did. I wasn't thrilled by what Wes Goodwin did on the defensive side of the football, but I give Dabo a lot of credit. He ejected quickly and said, you know what? That wasn't a great hire. That's not good enough for Clemson. That's not good enough for what we need to do offensively moving forward. So you make this switch very quickly. So I think that's what great coaches do, though, man. When you figure out that you made not a great hire, go out and make a good one, right? Like you eject as quick as possible. And I think that it's going to be a good fit for Klubnik, this offense. I agree. I think that what you saw Kendre Miller doing also in the backfield this year, I mean, I'm envisioning Will Shipley being used in a similar fashion, which should be interesting. So I think you upgraded the offensive coordinator position. You got a young guy that I think does have some innovation to him with how he does things. And I think that it's a golf clap to Dabo for understanding that, like, hey, man, can't stick to what's just happening right now. We got to make some moves here to try to get back to the top.
And Ryan, the thing is, Dabo's a very loyal guy.
Yes.
Very loyal guy to a fault at times. And I think the fault is the staff he put together. I think 6 or 7 of the 10 assistants are guys that he either has coached in the past that were at Clemson, or were young coaches so Brandon Streeter played at Clemson, but that was before Dabo was the head coach there or was coaching there. But he got his GA start at Clemson when Dabo was a position coach. And he's a Clemson alum, and there was a sense of – and Brandon Streeter had been loyal to him, and he'd been an assistant coach under him and all that. And that's why he promoted him. Same with the O-line coach. Same with Wes Goodwin. There was a sense of loyalty to where I'm going to bring in, the running back coach is CJ Spiller. There's a lot of former players. And then the linebacker coach, the co-DC, is, I believe, was a teammate of Dabo's at Alabama, I believe. And so for him to make this kind of move, I promise you it was not easy for Dabo. I promise you it was not easy to just go, because sometimes you hire a guy, you don't really know him, but he interviews well and he doesn't do a good job. It's a lot easier to fire that guy, to be completely honest with you.
Sure.
But Dabo has known Brandon Streeter for over a decade. He knows his wife, he knows his kids, he knows all those type of things. That's the hardest firings to make. But he did it because that's what was needed to be done. Because at the end of the day, it's about your job is to win, and your job is to do right by the kids by giving them the best tools and resources they can to be successful. And the reality is the offense was again held back this year by the coaching. Not as much as last year, but it was held back again by the coaching. And, Notre Dame, we talk about how Notre Dame went 9-4 this year with a backup quarterback. Well, TCU went to the national championship game technically with a backup quarterback. Now, it's not the same. It's not apples to apples, thing, because Max Dugan's been a multi-year starter beforehand. But the point is, that's not the guy that won starting job coming out of fall camp.
Sure.
And I think that was a really good job by them. Now, the concern is, okay, but you couldn't get him out of his funk at the end of the season. And I think part of that is Max Dugan was just tapped out. I just don't – I don't think he had anything left.
Man. I think he was spent.
Yeah, because that kid played his butt off all year.
Remember that kid, the Big 12 championship game, man? Like, that kid was spent.
Oh, God. I mean, they're having to, pick him up off the ground, and then they're calling another quarterback run play the next play, and he's running. I mean, it's just – the kid gave you everything he had, and I just think that's kind of who he was, because I would say, well, maybe he got more out of him earlier than he was capable of. That's the other thing, and then people got more film on him. So I like the hire. I do, and I think this is going to be great for Cade Klubnik. Now, is this automatically, okay, Clemson's back to Clemson's back? No, they're not, because their defense is still a concern, but he's not walking into the same talent that they had 4, 5, 6 years ago. There's no Mike Williams on their roster.
No.
There's no T. Higgins. There's no Justin Ross. There's no Hunter Renfrow. There's no Travis Etienne. With all due respect to Will Shipley, he's not Travis Etienne. Different type of player. Mm-hmm. So I will say this. I think he's got a little bit more talent up front than they had back then. I actually do think Clemson has decent talent up front, Ryan. They just didn't play well all the time. There's decent talent there. He's going to have a great quarterback for college, but he's not Trevor Lawrence. He's not Deshaun Watson, right? So they're not back per se, but this moves them a step closer. This could be the thing that holds off Florida State and NC State and North Carolina and Miami and all those teams in the ACC that are trying to ascend. This is a move that kind of stops the slide. What I don't know is if this then starts moving the needle forward again. That's what I don't know. And I think in order to do that, he's got to make a similar change on the other side of the ball.
Agree.
So, yeah, that's a That's a very interesting one. We'll get back. We got some more super chats. We're going to get to those here in a little bit. Let's get to some of these other ones here, Ryan.
We had John A1 ask, is having a drop defensive end, the Viper Notre Dame system, a must in modern college defenses? Brian, if I could hit this one, John, is it a must? I don't think that every scheme is the same, right? And you see 3-3-5 systems now kind of popping up all over the place. They don't have a drop end in that system technically, right? They have 3 linebackers in that regard. But I do think that if you are a 4-man team, it is beneficial to have the ability to drop that end a lot because there's different looks that you can give out of it, right? And I think that you see a lot of quarterbacks that make some bad decisions in short zone coverage at times where that defensive end is just going to drop into that, that hook curl or curl flat zone where it turns up to be a bad play, a tip pass, an interception, whatever it is. So I think if you're a 4-man front, it's very useful. It is just for, just the ability to come with different pressure situations, drop guys into different zones to kind of confuse a quarterback, especially. But with teams moving to more 3-man fronts, I don't think it's not as important in that system, in my opinion. But in a 4-man front, I do think it's very beneficial. I do.
I don't think there's anything like this structurally that is a must with every team. But I think there are things that it would probably be a good idea to have something like this, whether it's a pure end or at least a package where you can get to that, where it's situational package, you can get to that in third down or something like that. But I think it's beneficial. I think there's a need for it, whether you're going to go to a 3-3-5 or 4-2-5 or a 3-4 like Georgia. I mean, Georgia's ends drop not a ton. They don't do they drop about as much as the Viper did this year. I mean, if you look at the numbers, but no, it's something, Ryan, where it's nice to have, but it's not something that you absolutely must have,
right?
In my opinion.
I think it's beneficial for defensive coordinators because then you can give another different look, but
right.
To your point,
I think it's beneficial. I just don't think it's a must.
No, you don't need it.
I just think it depends on what you do, right? I mean, because if you say that's a must, but I would make the case that Will Anderson can drop into coverage. He can.
Yeah.
But why?
Why would you ever do that? Yeah.
Because if you look at Alabama this year, let me find the numbers here real quick because he dropped into coverage 27 times this year. Okay, it's about 2 a game. Okay, maybe that might be 1 more per game than I would have him do. But they did less of that this year. He dropped into coverage 58 times last year. Wow. Right. And so this year he dropped into coverage 65 times. Now he didn't play as many snaps this year either. He played 685, partly because they didn't play as many games. Mm-hmm. But he played about 200 fewer snaps than he played last year. And so the production he had, but it's just kind of that's a tough decision to say, let's take the best pass rusher in college football and drop him into coverage. But if you have a blitz package, however, that you think we can get home, we know we can get home on this once, maybe twice. So you pick your spots where the other team is like, gee, I think this is a big down where Will's going to get us. And you run some sort of zone fire, Ryan, where you're like, we know in this 3rd and 5, they're going to slide here. So we're going to run this type of stunt where we actually slide into their slide, drop Will into coverage, bring a double fire off the other side, and we feel like we can get home on that. We can't get home on that every time because eventually they'll adjust, but we think, that's what decoy. I got that in my back pocket that in this situation, based off scouting, that we think we can run this zone fire and use Will as a decoy. It's no different than if you're using a receiver, a big time receiver as a decoy. You better not do it too much, but there's merit to it. So, but it's a tough decision to say, let's not have that guy rush the passer. If you don't have that kind of guy, then I think you'd be kind of foolish to not have that in your package.
Agreed.
And, for example, Notre Dame used Dalen Hayes to drop into coverage a lot more than they asked Julian Ekwar to drop into coverage. Why? He's a lot better at it. Yes. And he wasn't as good of a pass rusher as Julian was. So that's the other thing too, is know your personnel, right? And that's what I think on that one, Ryan. So it's really starting off with some good questions today so far, Ryan.
Yep. We have another super chat from Charlie Weiss's Last Belt Loop. Charlie, thank you again. Mailbag. If Pete Carroll never left USC, do you think he could have made it to a powerhouse after the punishment, or do you think it was already done?
I think it was already done.
Yeah, it was definitely trending in a bad direction.
Got hammered. They'd have got so hammered. Part of the thing with USC and the stuff that happened to them is my understanding is they were a little lighter from a punishment standpoint on USC because Pete left. Had he stayed, they'd have got hammered, right? And they were, like you said, Ryan, they were already trending down.
Yeah, they were down a little bit.
He wasn't the same guy. I mean, and that was true at the end of Lou Holtz's tenure at Notre Dame too. Like there are just other things were kind of taking him in different directions. There's some other things we can't mention, but some personal things that were kind of going on. That maybe he's a little bit more distracted now than he was before. But they went 12-1 the year before he left. But even then, Ryan, that 2008 USC team, you watched the play and you're like, yeah, they won a bunch of games, but they weren't the same team that they were before. Mm-hmm. You could see it kind of, not quite going in the direction that you want it to go. But that 2009 team, it just the bottom fell out a little bit. Right. Yes. And you're talking about that night, they lost to Arizona. They got beat by Stanford. This is when it's over. They got blown out twice that year. Oregon beat them 47-20, and then Stanford beat them at home, 55-21. And then 3 weeks later, but 2 games later, they lost at home to Arizona. Ugh. That's like, okay. Right. And what's wild is that team that year beat Ohio State. And that's the year that they beat Notre Dame 34-27 and that big comeback from, that Jimmy brought them all the way back. But you could just see with that team is they still had a lot of talent. That's why they won games.
Right.
But that wasn't by the end of the year, that team had just kind of lost. And there was all the investigation and all the rumors and stuff, but it was time to move him for him to move on.
Also, sometimes when you're the premier program for a little bit too, you get a little bit of a target on your back too. Right. And I mean, people are going to gun for you to try to counteract and to be the new top dog, right? Like I think of like Alabama now with how Georgia kind of worked through things, right, Brian? Now they've kind of succeeded them as the premier program in college football. And I mean, the negative from the national title game is that it wasn't a very competitive football game, obviously. But the one thing I'm interested in now is over the next few years, obviously I think Georgia is going to be a very good team over the next few years. But now Georgia's the team that has that bullseye on their back. That's the team that I have to go beat that, right? I need to formulate a team that can go into Athens or a neutral site, wherever, and beat that type of football team. So I think at some point, the windows run their course a little bit as well. You kind of reach the end of a window. You had a great run, obviously, and that's what Pete Carroll had at USC. But I do think that eventually that downtrend comes for guys. Like, you're not just going to be that dominant forever. Like, that's just a very hard thing to maintain.
All right, next question, Ryan. We're going to get down to another super chat here from Tyler Evans.
From Tyler Evans, thank you for the super chat. Oklahoma and Florida, which school cannot afford another 6-7 season in your opinion? I think it's Florida, actually. Yeah. I don't. Yeah, do you agree with that? Yeah.
Oh yeah. There's no look. Oklahoma fans aren't exactly a patient group, nor should they be. You're Oklahoma. You're in the playoff 3-4 years ago. But Florida, I mean, look. Dan Mullen got fired a year after playing in the SEC championship back-to-back years and was the only team that came within even a whisper of beating Alabama that year. Like the only team that played Alabama tough that year was Florida. Kyle Trask was a Heisman Trophy contender for a bunch of the year. Before the next season was even about more than halfway through, he was done. So they'll give you a 1-year mulligan. And if you don't build on it quick, you're going to be in trouble. And this whole thing with Jaden Rashada, which we have a question about that, let's just bring that up now, Ryan, because I do think that's relevant. Sure. But, let me just finish this point because I don't want to go away from Tyler's question. But do you have a more thought on explaining why you think it's Florida? I just think it's SEC fans are just not at all patient or realistic.
Not at all patient. Yeah. And I actually just talked with this to a buddy about this, I think yesterday, the day before. But even on top of the Rashada saga that's happening, you're seeing a lot of kids transfer out of Florida this offseason as well. So I liked the Billy Napier hire at first. I thought that had potential to be a good one. But I think that and this is just my assumption because I'm looking at the transfer portal numbers, that there's a lack of buy-in in that program as well. So if you're not winning football games and there's a lack of buy-in, I just don't see you lasting that much longer.
Right. Well, and the other thing too is I don't think they recruited the level they're used to. And they had the
No,
11th ranked class on 247, which is
it's a solid class.
it's a solid class. It's not a great class, but they didn't get any. I mean, so if you look at it, they're the Notre Dame and Florida, the two teams in the top 15 that didn't get a 5-star player. But Notre Dame's ranked 3 spots ahead of them. I think Notre Dame's class is significantly better than Florida's class, but they missed out on a lot of their top targets. It's a good class. Don't get me wrong. It's a good class, but it wasn't like an elite class. According talking to Brian Smith, there were some unforced errors from the staff with how they handled in-state kids and things like that proved problematic. So they didn't necessarily build up the trust or the cool relationship with, like, one thing Matt Rule did, for example, when he got to Texas, he hired assistant coaches that had Texas ties or were former high school Texas coaches. Like, one of the best things he did when he got down there was doing that. Because he's like, look, if we're going to win here, we got to recruit the state of Texas. Billy Napier and his staff did not do that. And let's be honest, high school coaches, even not good ones, that have elite players, want to have their own ego stroked. This is one of those professions, Ryan, where even people that suck have egos like they're the greatest. I mean, you've seen it. And I've seen it a ton, obviously, being in it. I mean, I've gone against D3 coaches. I'm like, dude, you're not even good at this level. We're at literally the bottom of college football, and you suck at it. And you walk around like you're this dude. Like, but it's just the nature of what this profession attracts, right? And that's true in high school. It's true in, I mean, I can't speak to Pop Warner because I never played Pop Warner football. But it was true at high school coaching everywhere I've ever been. And so you go into a state, Ryan, and you don't give them love as an in-state coach. Like, if Marcus Freeman came to Indiana and just ignored Indiana high school football coaches, they'd be pissed. But it's like, who cares? You get like one kid from Indiana a year. You know what I mean? Like, but at Florida, at Texas, and schools like that, and you've got to be able to make those people happy. And he didn't do that early on. And so that's a big unforced error from what I'm told by Brian Smith, who lives down there and talks to a lot of high school coaches, right? So I don't think he's necessarily done the job that a lot of people, like Oklahoma's class is ranked 5th. I think it's overrated, like very overrated class. But when you have a number 5 class, it's going to keep people a little bit, it's going to let you do the whole just wait till we get all of our players here thing. Is going to go a little bit further. When you're recruiting the 11 to 13 class, it's like, what players?
Yeah.
And then and here's the thing, when Rashada leaves, like, you know, now that Rashada's out of the class, I believe he's not listed. Yeah, he's still listed on there. He's still listed as a commit. When he leaves, that class is going to take a big hit.
Yes. Well, and I think in comparison to Oklahoma as well, I mean, there was a little bit of a max exodus after Lincoln Riley left too, right? So you needed, I mean, it's not like Brent Venables went into the best situation ever, right? Like, it's going to take a couple years to rebuild that thing. I still don't think the team played particularly hard in a couple games, you know, during that season for on Oklahoma's side of things. But I just think there's more buy-in from Oklahoma than there is from Florida right now. Like, I just don't see the buy-in from Florida. That's mainly the biggest point of it. And to another great point by you is that they are not the most patient fan base, which I understand. I mean, they're Florida, right? Like, you should expect to win. I get that.
Right.
But,
right.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and they've done okay in the transfer portal. They've done okay. They haven't done great. You know, they got an offensive lineman from Baylor. They got the Deuce Spurlock kid who's a linebacker from Michigan who's just like, you know, didn't really do a whole lot there. Taraja Mitchell from Ohio State, who just was kind of a guy at Ohio State. Cameron Jackson, who's a defensive lineman from Memphis, went there. You know, good transfer.
He's a big boy, man.
Yeah, yeah. Graham Mertz, and then Caleb Banks, who's a defensive lineman from Louisville, who's a good player. You know, then you look at Oklahoma and you're like, dude, they're loading up on portal kids. You know, they just got Andrew Anthony. They got that Rondell Boythroyd kid from Wake Forest that everybody's all fired up about. Whatever. He was fine. Yeah, I wasn't necessarily in love with him. A lot of people were. Got Deshaun McCullough that a lot of people were fired up about. Got Jacob Lacey.
On Boythroyd, I'd say that Jean-Baptiste is a better player than Boythroyd, in my opinion.
The numbers aren't there.
Sure.
But the film tells me
some context
story.
To that. Yeah.
Right. film, that kid's not playing at Ohio State. He's not
Yeah.
getting on the field at Ohio State. I agree with you. I feel the same way about Jack Sullivan, to be completely honest with you, from Purdue.
Yeah.
The numbers aren't there because he didn't play as much.
Sure.
But yes, I would agree with you on that, Ryan. I would agree with you on that.
I just would like to see what the production would be for like a Jean-Baptiste if you dropped him on the
Right.
Wake Forest, right? For instance. Yeah.
Right. So that's the thing is you look at, they got Reggie Pearson from Texas Tech, Austin Stogner. They got him back, which I think is a very interesting thing. They got a defensive lineman, Davon Spears, Ryan. I don't know a lot about him, but he's rated high. He's considered a good, one of the highly ranked transfers from Texas State. So there's just a lot more buzz, and that buzz can get you a little bit of a grace period. Like, let's be honest, Charlie Weiss gets fired after 3-9 at a lot of SEC schools.
Oh yeah.
But at Notre Dame, like that success the first 2 years, it got him it got him 3 more years, right? Where the reason Ty got fired after year 3 is, number one, Ty didn't work hard, and Charlie did. But number two, that can maybe be balanced by the fact that Ty was a good guy that people liked and respected, and Charlie was not necessarily that by everybody. But Ty had 1 good year, and then bottom fell out. Where Charlie had 2 really good years in a row. That's the difference. And that got that buy-in. So, you've got to have some level of success either on the field or recruiting. But you know what else helped Charlie keep that job for 5 years? It was bringing in highly ranked recruiting classes.
Yes.
The people say, just wait till Charlie's guys become seniors or juniors. And it just didn't pan out that way, And so I think that's why there's a lot more excitement and buzz at Oklahoma. And
they have the National Player of the Year, a quarterback in their 2023 class. So they had that going for them too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll say this too, Ryan. Yeah. Oklahoma better figure it out real fast, because my answer flips if we're having the same question a year from now. Because if they struggle again and then head into the SEC,
yes,
that's going to be a problem.
That's true.
It's going to be a problem.
Yep. Things are about to get a lot tougher for Oklahoma here.
Yes. I want to bring up something here real quick from Tyler Hanley. It says, IB family, my family could use some prayers. We lost my father unexpectedly yesterday morning. He and my mother took my brother and I to our first game. So hug and love your family close. Hey, Tyler, man, I will be praying for you. I couldn't even imagine if I lost my dad right now. And I'm 40-something years old. So, man, I don't know what to say other than we love you and we're praying for you and your whole family, man. Just be strong. And this football season is going to be tough for you. I'm just preparing you for that now from a lot of other conversations, but just try to prepare yourself to look at it as remembering the first time in a way where you remember not the loss, but the joy that you experienced with your dad in so many different ways, but especially with Notre Dame football. So, man, we're praying for you, and we appreciate you coming here to let us know that. Obviously you feel that this is your IB family. That's it right there, Ryan. And man, we'll be praying for you, buddy, for sure. A lot of people here will. So as soon as this show's over, I'll definitely spend some time in prayer for you, man. So you and your whole family. So thank you for letting us know, Tyler. Thank you for letting us know. I want to get back to the mailbag, Ryan, with some we have some other questions down here that I want to get to. We had a super chat here from John Banco that I wanted to get to.
Yeah. John, thank you for the question. Thank you for the super chat. Why did Oregon end up losing the 2 flips from Notre Dame, Dante Moore and Peyton Bowen?
Well, Peyton Bowen's situation is a little bit more cut and dry. He didn't want to go to Oregon. His dad pushed him to go to Oregon because they offered him a big deal.
Yeah.
But what we reported was accurate, right? And Oklahoma is just, I think, kind of where he always wanted to go. My understanding is Oklahoma upped their offer as well, but I think he just played Notre Dame, right? Yeah. We gave him and the family the benefit of the doubt during the process. Lesson learned for us.
Yes.
And I think his mom was honest with us. She was clearly not happy about all this, but I think that Peyton was lying to people. I'm just going to come out and flat out say it. Peyton never told Notre Dame he had the concerns about going there that he did.
Yeah.
They asked him. Many times they asked him, hey, man, like there's a lot of smoke here. Like we need to know what's going on. No. It's bull crap. It's BS. That's a flat out lie. Because then when you commit to Oklahoma, you say, I've been thinking about this for a long time. So there's some lessons that we have to learn through this process too. to where we'll report what we're being told, but then maybe we'll take more of a I'll believe it when I see it approach, which is unfair because not every family's that way. Sure. You know, when Jaden Greathouse took that visit to Texas, it was literally just to go with some teammates to a game, and there was no recruitment that was followed up on it, right? And kids should be allowed to have that freedom. But when a kid does it over and over and over, you say, I know what you're telling me, but I've been here, done that before. Yes. So I need to see it. And I just think he lied. And that may sound harsh to people. But, you can't say that about why? Why? He's 18 years old. He lied. Why can't I say that? Why can't people be accountable for that? I don't care where he goes to school. Just be a man about it and be honest about it. We're not talking about a 13-year-old. We're talking about an 18-year-old, right? He lied many, many times. He lied.
Over many, many months.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it is what it is. The Dante thing, I think, is a little bit different. Dante's thing is Dante really liked Kenny Dillingham and had a really good relationship with Kenny Dillingham. Now, do I think I know for a fact UCLA is not getting Dante if they didn't pony up. That's just that that's not a hidden thing in his recruitment. But UCLA had been on him for a long time. Like even when he was committed to Notre Dame, UCLA was talking to him and on him and had come out to visit him. So there was a relationship there. And I think for Dante, he put a lot of value in the relationship with the coach that was going to be coaching him. His dad and his people around him were more of the ones that wanted the NIL. Now, Dante agreed to it. So I'm not saying Dante didn't care about NIL. He agreed to it. He allowed them to not manipulate, but to kind of steer his recruitment the way that it went. He allowed that. So when that was a factor, but for Dante, when it came to picking which school was offering him NIL money, he put a lot of emphasis on my relationship with the people there. Yeah. And when Kenny Dillingham left Oregon, that hurt them majorly.
Yes.
And I think it opened the door for UCLA to step in there. So I think because no matter who Oregon hired, that guy was not going to have the relationship with Dante that the UCLA staff did. Yep. That's really what it boils down to for me. So that's a more legitimate one for me is if Kenny Dillingham doesn't leave, Dante signs with Oregon, in my opinion. I don't think there's any doubt, Ryan.
I think so, too. Yeah, I think so, too. I will say this, though. I really do like Dante's skill set in the Chip Kelly offense, though. I think that's going to be really, really nice. But
yes,
yeah,
he fits
I'm
well.
hoping for the best. I'm hoping for the best, man. He was phenomenal.
I like Dante. He's set to thrive in those type of settings. I mean, Dante's built for those type of settings. I need to see him do it on the field like I do with Kenny Minchie and every other quarterback in the country. But there's never been a doubt about the kid's talent. My question is up here and right here. Those are my questions with Dante. But the talent is outstanding. I mean, there's no denying that. And to your point, I have a lot more faith that Chip Kelly is going to get him to play to his potential than I do Oregon. Because here's the thing: Chip Kelly's not going to stop running the football.
No.
And he also knows Dante's not a runner. So you're going to go to a system that's going to protect him a little bit more than an Oregon system that will run the ball, but it's still going to put a lot on the shoulders of their quarterback.
Yep. And if he got that much out of Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I'm just very curious to see how much he gets out of Dante.
Yes.
And Dante he has a good chance to start as a freshman too.
Yep.
So,
thing about Dante too is he's going to play as a freshman there.
Yep.
And I think that's something he wanted. I don't know. This one I don't know. This is an opinion. I don't think Bo Nix coming back helped Oregon's cause, to be honest with you. Dante wants to play as a freshman. That's one of the things a lot of people knew about his recruitment. That's one of the things that, so I'm trying to think how to say this. There was some hesitation on the part of the Carr family to go to the same school as Dante, not because they didn't want to compete, because you don't go to Notre Dame if you don't want to compete. And you don't involve yourself in helping recruit Kenny Minchie if you don't want to compete. And that's what CJ did. It was a well-known fact that Dante's dad was pushing schools for, if you want my kid, you've got to make this kind of promise. And that was one of the issues with Notre Dame with his dad, is Notre Dame would not make that promise. But at the same time, if you're on the other side of this, you're like, well, I don't know that. And I know the Notre Dame coaches are telling me that, but I don't know if that's true or not. And that was the hesitation. It was a well-known fact that the people around Dante were saying, we want to go somewhere he's going to play as a freshman. And I'll be shocked if he's not starting at UCLA by some point in time as a freshman. Maybe they don't start him in the opener just because that's a lot of pressure to put on. I'm a believer that you don't start a freshman in the game one unless you have no choice. Bring him in at some point. We saw what it did for Sam Darnold as a redshirt freshman. We saw how much it helped Trevor Lawrence that he played in the first game, in every game. He just wasn't the starter. Because when you play a freshman and he struggles and then you got to bench him, it's like, ugh. But when you play him a little bit and then he proves himself like he's ready, then you slide him in, it takes a little bit of that pressure off of him, in my opinion. And I think that would be the ideal scenario for Dante at UCLA. I don't know if you agree with that, Ryan, but that's kind of my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I just the quarterback room with what it is, I just don't know if there's anybody that's going to keep him out of the starting lineup day one, though, is my only thing. I mean, they got the Colin Schlee kid from Kent State, right? It's like, who's the guy that's holding him back from starting in the first game? That's my only thing,
Right. I think you're bringing a guy like that in.
Ideally, I agree with you, though. I would like a kid to be patient.
But I think that's why you bring a kid like that in. That's why I think you bring a kid like that in, Ryan, is to, hey, you're a placeholder. You're our Kelly Bryant. You're a placeholder until we feel Dante's ready to go. And now what I don't know is I need to look at their schedule because they play Coastal Carolina in the opener. Then they play at San Diego State, home against NC Central. Oof. Why are they playing North Carolina Central? Why? And then at Arizona. Well, then the rest is TBA to be announced. So that's their non-conference. But they play at Arizona, at Oregon, at Stanford, at USC, at Utah. And they have Washington State, Colorado, Cal, Arizona State at home. So, to your point, like maybe you bring him off the bench against Coastal and San Diego State, and then hopefully by the third game, he starts. And I thought Michigan actually did a really smart job this year when they had the battle at quarterback, is they gave the veteran the first game.
Caden McNamara, yeah.
Yeah, and then let the younger guy, J.J. McCarthy, yet let the younger guy kind of come in and be the next guy in. So there's, maybe a little bit less pressure in that instance. That to me made more – I didn't like it, but it made more sense than what like Notre Dame did where like Deshaun Kaiser gets the first series and then Malik gets the next series. It's just like, well, okay, now if Malik doesn't lead you down on a touchdown drive –
why would you put it back? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And it just wasn't – it was a ridiculous thing to do. So.
Well, and that's it. That's a pretty daunting away schedule, by the way, for UCLA. A lot of easy games at home, though, next year. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get to some more here, Ryan. We got this one from Notre Dame 2164.
Question: with the concerns at defensive line this year, would anybody be surprised to see Brennan Vernon making an impact 4 to 5 games into the season? Slightly. I mean, look, man, I think that and this is my opinion based upon what I've seen in person from Brennan down at the All-American Bowl in San Antonio, is that Brennan Vernon, I think, is very underrated in the sense that I think there's a lot of people that have this misconception that he's this high floor, low ceiling player. Like, I think that people think that. I actually think it's a little bit of reverse, man. I think his floor is a little lower than most people think, but I think his ceiling's a little higher too. I mean, that kid has some legitimate tools, man. He is 6'4 plus, right around low hair under 6'5, pretty long arms, explosive. I mean, he came into the bowl game. He came into the All-Star Bowl 20 plus pounds lighter than what he had played during the season. He was about 260 pounds, and he looked explosive, looked long. And you saw during the week, there are flashes of understanding what to do, right? Like the double swipe at the top of the arc against Luke Montgomery that's going to Ohio State, working inside and be able to use that speed to power and maintain balance working through contact. There's a lot of tools to work with Brendan Vernon. And I think long-term, he's going to be an excellent football player at Notre Dame. But I do think that there's a maturation process that needs to happen. I think he needs to be coached up. I think he needs to be developed. Can't wait to see what Matt Bayless does with him in the weight room now that he's lost a little bit of that bad weight on his frame. So I think year 2, year 3, Brendan Vernon is going to make a big impact for Notre Dame. But year 1, I just think that you have to ease that kid along a little bit.
Yep. Somebody's really upset that I said, I can't believe they're playing NC Central. Here's my issue with that. They're in North Carolina. UCLA is in Los Angeles, right? Like I've said this before. I'm not against playing FCS teams if you're playing it right.
Play UC Davis.
Play UC Davis. Play some in-state program that
Sacramento
you can kind
State.
Benefit your in-state program.
Exactly.
If North Carolina was playing NC Central, fine. I don't care. right? I've said this, if Notre Dame's going to play an FCS school, Tennessee State and Youngstown State are the two that make the most sense because of the location and the states that you want to recruit. But I don't understand why you're flying a team from North Carolina across the country to come play you. Play Eastern Washington. Play Montana. Play Sam Houston State. Play a team like that. Why are you flying a team from across the country to come out and play in the Rose Bowl? That's my issue. It's nothing to do with NC Central. It's my issue with how and who you should be playing when you're playing an FCS team. So that's my issue. So somebody got really upset about that. But yeah, that's my issue with it. And I've expressed that time and time again when teams do that. So
I would love to see UCLA play a Sacramento State. Like Sacramento State's a really good FCS team now. Like I would love to see that game.
Yeah. Well, remember when Washington played Eastern Washington? Didn't they get beat one year Eastern Washington?
They did, because actually they lost to Montana 2 years ago. Washington lost to Montana like 10-7 or something like that. Yeah.
Well, and I know that Arizona beat North Dakota State this year, but North Dakota State's like won their last 2 or 3 games against those teams. But like, here's my thing. ACC, the HBUs that are in the Southeast and the FCS schools in the Southeast should be playing ACC and SEC schools. The Big Ten team should be playing. There's plenty of FCS teams in the North. Mm-hmm. The North Dakota State should be playing like the Northern Big Ten teams and then the Bible Belt teams, right, from the Big 12 and conferences like that. And then the schools from Texas should be playing FCS schools from Texas and Oklahoma, and schools on the West Coast should be playing West Coast FCS schools. That's my whole point. Because one of the big drivers of the only reason an FCS team, in most instances, with the exception of like North Dakota State, teams like that they think a win, like James Madison playing, when they were in FCS playing Virginia Tech and Virginia made a lot of sense because, hey, we think we can play with these guys, and if we win, then maybe we can get some kids to come here that would otherwise maybe go the other place. Yeah. But it's a revenue driver. That's it. Mm-hmm. And so to me, you should be supporting the schools in your region. That's what I think. Because you're going to pay this school X amount of dollars. It's going to cost them a whole lot more to fly out to California than it is for them to play in NC State or Clemson or something like that. That's what I can't stand. So, yeah, that's my issue. Let's get to our next one here, Ryan.
From Brandon K. Long drive today, so I will drop some mailbag questions now. In spring ball, which positions do you want to see dominating their opponents? For example, wide receiver versus cornerback, offensive line versus defensive line, etc. Which gives you optimism versus concern? I mean, I think for me, Brian, which ones do I want to see dominate? I want to see the offensive line versus the defensive line be able to dominate early, but then I want to see it kind of come back the other way, right? Like I think maturation throughout the spring would be a really positive thing for the defensive line, because right now offensive line is one of your best returning units, right? You're going to see that team and say, early on in the spring, offensive line is going to do a darn good job against the defensive line, but defensive line hopefully brings that back a little bit. And I think similarly with the cornerback versus wide receiver conversation too. Like I expect cornerback to have success early on against the wide receivers, but also I want to see the wide receivers come back. So It's not only just, I don't think there's any unit that I necessarily want to just dominate the entire spring though. I want to see struggles early and then development to fight back. You disagree with that?
No, I agree with that. I'm just trying to think of like which would be one that I want to see. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I want to see Sam Hartman just come out and Tyler Buckner just come out and rip people up. Yeah. Because like in my mind, it's like, man, if they're ripping it up, like they're doing it against a pretty good defense. But no, Ryan, you as a coach, you never want one unit to just consistently dominate
the whole spring.
You never want to see that. You want it, and not that it goes the other way, but just that it becomes a little bit more. We don't get dominated all the time.
Sure.
And that's what I want to see. So yes, if the receivers are and here's the thing, you don't know what to make of it if it's not happening. Like if the receivers are coming out ripping up the secondary, you have two thoughts. Number one is, are the secondary guys not improving? That's the first thought. Or the other one is, boy, these receivers are getting a lot better. But you don't know which one it is. And that's the thing that's really difficult about coaching in college football. Now, we at the Division III level, now we didn't have this at the 1AA level. We couldn't we didn't have a scrimmage, but at the Division III level, we could scrimmage. You get one scrimmage. So you at least had some semblance of, okay, here's where we are against another team. But the Division I level, it's you don't get that. You don't get that scrimmage opportunity to kind of go against other teams. That's why I've said I've always advocated for. I would love to see teams start to be allowed to have. I would add an extra week onto spring ball or onto fall camp. I'd incorporate more off days into that because like I want to see designed off days in camp like you have during the season. I think that's needed for players because not every coach is going to be responsible with giving kids enough downtime that they need. So I'd like to see it extended a little bit longer, more time in between, but then use part of that to give like a 3-day. You guys can kind of, one school can go on the other school's campus, or you guys can like meet up. Like, let's say Notre Dame and Purdue wanted to meet at Culver for 3 days or something like that. Like, you practice on one field, we'll practice on another field, but then we come together for some. When we go 7-on-7, when we go team, when we go red zone, we're going against each other. Right. And we'll do some one-on-ones.
Kind of like what they do during All-Star game week sometimes during practice. Yeah.
Right. I think the NFL does some of this stuff. I don't know if it's the same format, but like, where you're not going in, I mean, you're doing individual by yourself, and there's certain things you do together. You do special teams by yourselves because you don't need to be banging on special teams in fall camp, in my opinion. But then there's other things that you do together, as maybe you do that like maybe 2 weeks before the first game, and then after that, okay, now it's time to dive into prep for our first game. I wish college football would do something like that, to be honest with you. I think it'd be better for kids. I think it'd be better for teams. It would really help out. I think it'd be good. Will C 2.0, who got mad at me for the NC Central comment, but I think he understands my point now. North Carolina is greater than California. Agree or disagree? As someone who has been to both states, absolutely North Carolina is better than California. I don't know if I always would have believed that. I went to college in North Carolina my freshman year. I've been to North Carolina plenty of times. I've coached games in North Carolina. I love North Carolina. It's beautiful. It's got good food. There's other attractive things in the state of North Carolina that we don't need to get into. But California I used to like, but it's just gone downhill in a major way. But there's some beautiful aspects of California too. It's just so big.
Are we just saying overall North Carolina? Overall.
Okay. Yeah. Now I'll say this: there are some parts of California that are really nice. San Diego's really nice. There's some parts like in the eastern part, like in the valley and some like wine country that's gorgeous. But just when I think California, I think of the cities.
LA. Yeah.
LA, San Francisco, pass. Sacramento, pass.
North Carolina is actually one of the spots I've always talked to Caitlin about, when we're close to retirement, all that stuff way down the road that you move to North Carolina. Yeah, that's the spot. That's the spot. Absolutely. One of the Carolinas would be fantastic.
And it's a booming state. I mean, I remember when I was in college was 19, my freshman year was the 97-98 season. It was my freshman year, and I was in Fayetteville. We called it Fayetteville. And we'd go to like Charlotte, we'd go to Raleigh a lot. And go to like this club called Mars, and it was like one of those clubs that has like different sections. Like there's like the heavy metal headbanger group, and then there's like the hip hop area. There's like a disco area. There's like a country. It's like this big dance club or dance hall, but it's like all these different sections with different kind of music, right? And we go out there and like the Cary area and all that. I mean, it was popular. It was NC State, but like then you go back like 20 years later, and I go back to visit a friend a few years ago. And you're like, dude, I don't even recognize this place. It's built up so much. So you have a lot of folks kind of going to that area, and it's just a lot more business there. There's a lot more jobs going into the North and South Carolina, leaving other states. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Charlotte is one of the most beautiful cities I've ever been to. It's clean. I mean, from a guy that's between Philadelphia and New York, Charlotte is such a clean little city. And I love it.
Somebody asked me a question if I started my career at Marist. I did not start my career at Marist. The only time I've ever been to Marist, I actually interviewed for a job at Marist, but ended up going to Duquesne instead. But I started my career at Methodist College in Fayetteville, North Carolina. So did not like Fayetteville. That's why we called it Fayetteville. I was not a fan of but it was wild because like it's Fort Bragg is there. It's like I came from a city where there's a lot of military. We see jets fly. I'm from a Navy town, but we're at my first practice, like first week of practice. I don't remember if it was the first practice. We're the first week, and there was like the practice was like down in the bottom of campus. It was behind the campus, like you have to go down a hill, and then there's like the practice field, and there was like a golf course on campus because it was a big golfing school. But then there's like this wooded area to the left, like really heavy wooded area. And I remember being at practice one day, and I look over, and there's a dude running through the woods with this gear on his back, and he's holding this big machine gun. And I'm looking around like, does nobody else see this? Like, is this not a problem? But apparently the Fort Bragg was allowed to use that wooded area to do drills. And I'm like, does no one else see the dude with the machine gun, like right there? Like, is this not a problem for anybody else? Am I the only one seeing this? But apparently, like, to the older guys, like, they were used to it. They were used to seeing those guys in the woods and stuff like that. So I was like, man, this is a little weird for me. It was one of many things that I did not like about Methodist. So, yeah.
Nice.
But we played against Salisbury my freshman year and beat them. And then I transferred to Salisbury after my first year. So that's how that all happened. So I went to Methodist to play quarterback. They moved me to receiver like the first week. I went to Salisbury because I'd given up on playing quarterback. And then like first month of the season, maybe it's during first month in fall camp, I'm out there throwing with the quarterbacks, and the quarterbacks coach comes up to me and goes, "Hey, did you ever play quarterback before?" And I was like, yeah, a little bit. And he's like, so then like kind of started getting my ear about moving, and somebody said Brian was scared. Heck yeah, I was scared. If you saw a dude running with a freaking machine gun running by your practice, you'd be a little bit scared too.
It'd be weird if you weren't scared.
Yeah. Like, hey guys, that dude's over there with a machine gun. Does nobody else have? I was literally looking around like, does nobody else have a problem with this? And they're like, no, that's normal. That's normal? Like, what? So anyway, then it was explained to me why it was normal.
And then Brian went to Salisbury. He started to love the triple option, and here we are today.
Yeah. So somebody's just trying to get slapped today. They did have a great cafeteria though. Salisbury, that was part of the reason I went there, is they had a great cafeteria. Like, because I like at Methodist my first year, I had probably bologna sandwich and carrot cake almost every day, unless I was buying my own food, because the food there was so bad. I think I've said this before, but like the first time there, I put a spoon in the pasta. It was like a ziti, and lifted it up, and the whole freaking tray came with me because it was so nasty. Like, I couldn't. I had to like cut it. The whole tray lifted up. I was like, yeah, I'm not eating this crap. So bologna sandwiches and carrot cake. So then you go to Salisbury, and they have a really good spread. And I'm like, okay, this is better. This is a little bit better, a little bit better situation for me. So no doubt. Let's get back on track here. Otherwise, we're not going to have no chance of getting to all these questions here. We have a question from Raheem Pelham, super chat. Thank you for the super chat, by the way, Raheem.
Thank you very much. Who is one player on both sides of the ball that entered the portal who would have instantly made Notre Dame a championship contender?
Ooh. Well, I kind of think they got one on offense, Ryan. On that side of the ball.
I'll tell you this. Any player in college football.
Yeah. I'll tell you this, Ryan. They had no chance at this kid. Yeah. But the first name that pops into my head is if NIL wasn't a thing and kids were more fair with it and they weren't seeking that bag immediately, guy that I would have loved to have seen be part of this defense is Jordan Birch.
It's a good one.
Like, you put Jordan Birch on this D line.
Yeah. It's a good one.
That'd have been nasty.
Yeah. That'd have been really good big
nasty.
ends.
Outside of that, I don't know if there's a lot of guys out there that I would.
It was always quarterback on offense, and you got arguably the best one in the portal, right? So, like, cool. Defensively, it would be some type of pass rusher. Birch is a pretty good one for guys that were available. I'm trying to think of, like, I don't know, give me the best Viper in college football, I guess. Like, I don't know. I don't know.
My thing where I would say no to Vipers, because I feel like, go give me a guy at a position where you're not really strong. Like, there was no like will linebacker that just comes in and is like, oh my gosh,
the dude.
Like, yeah, there's that guy. They don't need a corner. There's no. I'd say the only other position is maybe safety. Yeah. Would be the only one I'd think of. But the other one too is if there was like some big 315-pound just beast of a nose tackle. But I don't know who that would be, so I couldn't say who that would be. I don't know if there was that kind of guy out there or not. But of the guys off the top of my head, Jordan Birch would be the first one that pops in my head, to be honest with you.
Yep.
So let's go to the next question. Good, that's a good one, Raheem. Appreciate that. We have a super chat from Adam Shipley as well.
From Adam, thank you for the question. With Drake Bowen winning the Buckus Award, how is he not a five-star kid? Is this a perfect example of the bias from the national recruiting rankings? Five-star, man. For me, I think that Drake should be ranked higher than he is from a consensus all across the board. I mean, I think he's a top 50 kid in the country, no doubt, in my mind, especially after seeing him in person. But I mean, I think he's a bordering 5-star, in my opinion, right? Like if you told me he's a top 35 player in the country, I'd be like, okay, I totally see that. I get that, right? But I would say he's high 4, bordering on 5-star. And I don't always take those. Look, sometimes those awards are given to players that have this just crazy production, which Drake Bowen has. But also, I think he's underrated. But I think the 5-star is a good question. But I don't think it's. If he was a 5-star, Drake Bowen would be a 5-star because he's big, he's explosive, he's talented, right? Like the traits are what makes your guy a 5-star. It's not only just the production that they have, right? In that instance. So I think the production doesn't really make you a 5-star. I think that the athleticism, the upside, the talent level that you have makes you a 5-star.
Yeah. I also don't think that just because you are the best player at a position, you should automatically be a 5-star.
Also,
I think Drake can have there's a case to be made that Drake is the best linebacker in the country. I don't have him as the number 1 linebacker, though. He's going to be 2 or 3 for me. Mm-hmm. I haven't finalized my entire rankings. He's going to be 2 or 3 for me. But again, I'm not a believer that just because you're the number 1 quarterback, you should be a 5-star. You should only be a 5-star if you're a 5-star. And some years, if there's only 10 5-stars, so be it. If other years there's 45, so be it. There shouldn't be this arbitrary mandate for, like Rivals does this. They will jump guys down to 4 to 3 stars because they can only have a certain number of 4-star players. That's stupid. Like there shouldn't be a maximum or minimum number. It's just the players are what they are. Like that's a fact. I know that for a fact. Unless they've changed it in the last year, what I just said about Rivals is absolutely true. I believe 247 has the same number of 5-stars every year. I have to go back and look at it, but I believe that's the case. And to me, if there's only 10 5-stars, then you should only have 10 5-stars. Players should be graded as to what they are. And if there's 200 extra 4-stars one year because it's a really deep year, then so be it. Ryan, you see the NFL draft all the time, right? Like, and this isn't the NFL draft, meaning if there's only 10 first-round grades, then there's only 10 first-round grades, but there's still going to be 32, well, in this case, 31 first-round picks. Yep. That's not what this is. Rankings are – your ranking is your ranking. There's no arbitrary – should be no arbitrary set number, maximum or minimum for what they are. So in this particular instance, even if Drake is number 1, he doesn't mean he's a 5-star. I love Drake Bowen. I just don't think he's a 5-star. I have him as a top 50 guy, Ryan, is how I have him. Yep. Right? He's more 50 to 75 than he is 25 to me, which is the range for 5-star. And so I'm okay with him not being a 5-star. I'm totally okay with that. And I'm also totally okay with saying he deserved the Butkus Award winner. When you look at the production he had this year, his team goes to state championship game, largely because of him. He didn't have an incredibly talented team around him. Great production on offense, great production on defense. He was a great player this year. Being a top 50 to 100 player is a pretty big compliment. You know, now when you start talking about him getting into the 200s, that's just stupid,
ridiculous,
right? Like that's dumb.
Yes,
but I'm okay if somebody wants to have Drake 75, probably a little lower than I'd have him, but I'm fine with that. That's not 50 to 75 is not 40 to 75, 40 to 100 is not a big difference for me. Like if you're a top 150 guy, you're really good, and you know, so I'm comfortable with it. And Rivals, I think, still has him as a top 50 player for all their flaws. Now, they may not finish with him in the top 50, but he's still there now. And SI 99 came out with their top 99 the other day, and he was in the top 50 for there too. I think those are fair rankings. Those are more in line with where he is. But if somebody wanted to have him 25, 30 spots lower than that, okay, that's fine. Whatever. He's still pretty good. He's still pretty good in my view.
Pretty good player.
Yeah. All right, let's get to some more here. We've got one here from Brendan K.
Brendan says, long drive. Oh, we already knocked this one out.
Oh, we did? My apologies. John A1.
John A1. We got a 2-parter here from John. 2-parter of the question. Both Notre Dame lines were in a new place in 2022. The defensive line lost its rock of physicality as the offensive line was trying to learn how to be physical. By the end of 22, the offensive line was physical. Can they now better? There's a second part of the question.
I didn't see the second part of the question. Oh, here we go.
Better prepare the defensive front in the offseason to prepare for elite competition physical standards.
You want to take a first crack at that?
Yeah, I think that by the end, yeah. So, I mean, John, it's the iron sharpen iron thing, and I think someone put in the chat like, Ryan, it's steel sharpens steel nowadays or something like that. But
he was just that's era of era on the board.
Yeah.
He likes to bust chops.
That was so funny. Yeah. No, I actually LOL'd when I read that.
Yeah.
But it's one of those
literally LOL'd.
Yes,
literally LOL'd.
Literally laughed out loud, man. Literally laughed out loud. So, yeah, John. I mean, I think for me, with what the offensive line should be coming back, right? With the Joe Waltz, Blake Fisher, Zeke Corral, and then the young offensive linemen that are going to be, the other offensive linemen that are competing for the other two guard spots. I think that you have a level of physicality that has been, I mean, it is head and shoulders from what we saw in 2021, right? 2022, there was a massive improvement from a physicality perspective. So you want to talk about baptism by fire, sink or swim, whatever terminology you want to use. I think that the defensive line is going to be tested every single day, from winter workouts into spring ball, playing against the offensive line. They're going to have to come to the party, man. They're going to have to rise to the occasion, all those cliched terms that you want to hear there. But I think that it absolutely is very beneficial for a defensive line to get your butt kicked a little bit. I think it is, because then it's like, hey, man, if I come up to you right now and I punch you in the face, are you going to punch back or are you going to go crying off to the side, right? Like, that's where it is.
I think a big reason why, because one of the things we talked about coming into the season was I don't think the team was physical anymore. Mm-hmm. The 2012 team was physical. The 2018 team was physical. The 2017 team was physical on both sides of the ball. The problem in 2019 and 2020 and 2021 is you got away from the he stand era, and a lot of his kids left, is you didn't have an offensive line that set the tone. I truly believe you'd have to correct me wrong if I'm wrong, Ryan, but I really off the top of my head can't think of a single team that I view as being a physical football team that doesn't have a physical offensive line. And I think that's where it starts.
Yeah.
Because it's like, to John's point, is if the offensive line is coming every day to hit me in the mouth, I got to bring it. And that, so the switch isn't, I don't like turning that switch on a physicality on Saturday. I think it's harder to do. And Notre Dame's teams lost that. I think this year's team, for all of its woes, was a more physical football team than it was last year. It's not where it needs to be yet, but it made progress. And so to me, it starts with the offensive line. If the offensive line is physical, your defensive line will be physical if you're a good football team.
No doubt.
And because they have to be, they're pushed to be. Whereas if you're not physical on the offensive line, I feel like defense, it's like because you think that you're playing physical, but you really aren't being challenged the way you need to. So, yes, to John's question, I think the offensive line was learning it. That's partly why it took them some time during the season to get there. But once they got there, they were there. And I think and we've talked about this a lot, I think that's going to make the defense a lot better as we kind of get into next season. I want to bring a question up from the bottom because it focuses on something we just talked about. I don't want to get too far away from it, Ryan, but I'm going to ask you that. I'll read this one just to give you the chance to respond to it first. This is about Drake. And he says, this is a great conversation. Do you not have him as a 5-star because he doesn't have the traits to become elite or because he needs a little bit more work to get there? So I'll explain my view, Ryan, but I want to give you first crack at it.
Yeah. I mean, so with Drake, I think the things that you saw, that I saw in San Antonio during the week of practice that are the big pluses for Drake Bowen are he's a really filled out kid. I mean, he's 6'2", 232 pounds now. He's a pretty large linebacker for his age. He's an explosive player. When he sees it, he runs and he makes some plays in pursuit that are pretty jaw-dropping. I think he has a good feel for the position, and I think that he understands gap integrity and where he should be on a football field at all times. I think those things. There is some rawness, though, at times to a Drake Bowen, though, because I don't think he takes on blocks incredibly well as of now. I think he struggled with that, especially during the game, to get off of contact. And I think that there is still a learning curve as far as playing inside full time. I mean, Drake at Andrean was playing on ball a lot. He was playing in space a ton. And in a traditional linebacker role, which is probably what he's going to play at the next level at Will or Mike, there is a little bit more of condensed space, making quicker decisions, doing all those types of things. So I think that for me, 99 Problems, I don't think there's a lack of traits with Drake Bowen.
Mm-hmm.
Are they elites? I mean, we could have a conversation whether they're elite. I wouldn't say they're necessarily elite, but I think he's a overall very good player all around, in my opinion, right? I think he has very good size for the position. I think he's a very good athlete for the position. I think he checks a lot of boxes. I don't know if I necessarily would say that he's elite in any area, but I do think that he has bordering on 5-star upside as a player as he becomes more consistent and better taking on contact, working through trash, working through traffic. I think that he can eventually get there, but I do think there's some rawness in certain areas, which there are for most high school players coming out.
Pretty much here, Ryan. This is why I implemented the 2-grade system. And this is why guys get a current grade and why guys get an upside grade. Because the upside grade is kind of says, what can you be? The reality is the reason Jalen Smith was a raw player coming out of high school too. Very raw. But the difference is he was so physically gifted that he could get away with it. Drake is not to that level of physical athletic skill. He's
not elite. Not elite.
No, he's not. And so he has to be more fundamentally sound than Jalen needed to be. Or Jeremiah Wusu finished his career at Notre Dame is not a very fundamentally sound player. Right? Because, I mean, in fairness, he hadn't been playing that position for very long. It wasn't what he really played in high school. So the point is that, you know, it's not surprising to me that Jeremiah Wusu has still so much more improvement to make in the NFL and why he's supposedly become a really good NFL player for that role. Again, I don't watch the NFL, but I know you've said that, and I've talked to some other people who read it, because I felt like he didn't go in the NFL as a finished product. And so Drake's very much that way. That's partly why I think some people missed the boat on him. Well, he doesn't do this, he doesn't do that. He's, you know, this guy. Yeah, but you don't understand. Drake is incredibly raw. And I think that's where a lot of people miss the boat on Brendan Vernon too, Ryan. And you've made this point many times. I think a lot of people have this assumption because of what he looks like. And I don't mean, you know, white or black or whatever, just like big, strong, physical, looks like he's 30, you know, with the beard and all that. That people think, well, he's a high floor, ready to play guy. No, he's a very low floor. Not very low floor guy. He's a very high ceiling, lower floor kind of guy because he has not been taught technique. And you've said this, he'll tell you that.
He will. Yeah.
He's very raw when it comes to how to play the game.
Mm-hmm.
And so physically he may be advanced, but technically he's not. And that's why there's so much room for him to improve. Same thing with Drake Bowen. And the same thing with Jaden Osbury. Jaden is wicked smart, but he's not necessarily a technically proficient player. And that's something I think there's this thought that he's a high floor guy because he's really smart. And Jaden Osbury is going to get a lot better just with technique alone and spending time in a weight room. And that's partly what has me so excited about this class, Ryan, is because a lot of these kids that people rank in the 50 to 100, 150, they're not as physically advanced as a lot of the 5-star kids. That's just the reality. Drake, you saw it. Drake Bowen is not as physically advanced as Anthony Hill from what I saw. But he's got better skill as a linebacker, in my opinion, and a lot more potential and room for improvement. And so those are the things I look at and say, yeah, you can show me the Peter Woodses and those kind of guys who are really good football players, the Vic Burleys, but those guys are like physically ready to go like now.
Right.
That's not Devin Houston. That's not Boubacar. That's not Armel. That's not Brendan Vernon. They need a lot more technical improvement and body development, which is why it's important to not look at what necessarily a guy is today, but what can a guy be? And that's the difference between a 5-star and a guy that's ranked 99th, right? I mean, it's just something you have to think about, right? It's like Jaden Greathouse is a better player right now than Braylon James, significantly so. But Braylon James has the higher ceiling, in my view. I don't know if you necessarily agree with that. So, like, he may be better now, but in 4 years, it may completely be flipped.
It's possible.
Right? You know who was the best receiver in the 2013 class when they were freshmen? Wasn't Will Fuller. It was Corey Robinson. Because he was more physically ready to play, had some things he could kind of get over. Him not being technically proficient didn't hurt him as much as it did Will Fuller because he was 6'4" and had incredibly long arms, could jump. Didn't take very long for Will Fuller to pass him, though.
Yes.
Right? And that's the thing, look at it. That's why we focus so much on the ceiling. I care a lot more about the ceiling than I do the floor, unless you need a guy to play right now. And that's why Jaden Greathouse is so important, because I think you need at least one freshman to come in and be a contributor right now. And he gives you the chance to do that. So very, very good question. I hope 99 that helps fill things up. So, yeah, we shall see. So, Ryan, here's a two-parter from Brandon K.
Right, Brandon, how do you recruit a kid start to finish? Who reaches out first? What part of your pitch do you say up front versus later? How do you close? What do you say when you reach out for every few days? What do you say in home versus over text? I know these things vary by recruit, but what's your general strategy? Well, Brandon, it's a great question. I think if I can go back real quick to the beginning of this question, right? So how do you recruit a kid start to finish? You already answered it, right? It does vary because there's some players, there's some recruits, for instance, that are guys instantly, right? They're the mainstream guys, that since 8th grade or 9th grade or whatever, that they're a dude, right? That they're going to be a dude. And then there's other guys like Brandon Hillman, for instance, right? In this year's class for Notre Dame, that was a late riser, that didn't start getting serious interest by the Tennessees, Miamis, and Notre Dames of the world until his senior season. So it does vary. It does. Who reaches out first? I would love to give you an absolute answer, but there's no absolute answer. I mean, I've talked to several recruits that Notre Dame has even offered that reach out constantly, but Notre Dame doesn't get back quite as fast because they aren't the priority, right? At the end of the day, if Notre Dame has identified, or any college has identified, a player as a priority football player for them, they're probably reaching out first. That's usually how that happens, especially if they're a mainstream guy that is a known commodity. They're a guy, they're a potential 5-star, high 4-star, etc. The guys that usually reach out first are usually more of the late riser guys, right? The guys that want to come to camp, show who they are, aren't as well-known type of thing. So it really depends on what the initial status is as a recruit. So if they're more well-known, Notre Dame's probably reaching out first, or college is probably reaching out earlier. But if they're a lesser-known guy that maybe is a little more raw, a little bit more of a late riser, that's probably them reaching out initially. How do you close? Great question. So closing is having real conversations and understanding what that player needs or that recruit needs to be successful, and just answering all those questions. At the end of the day, recruiting processes last as long as the questions are still on the table, right? If a recruit knows exactly what they want and they've reached that point of there's no questions remaining from any schools, that's when decision-making process happens, right? So that's usually when closing happens, is when you have finished answering all the questions, right? There's no question anymore to what a school can provide to me, which school is the best fit for me. Those things have all been answered at that point. So closing in real conversations, real relationships really breed those types of things. So what do you see when you reach out every few days? What do you say? I mean, usually, and you'll hear this from a lot of recruits, it's hardly ever about football, right? Like there's pitches that schools will make to say, this is how we see you. This is how you would fit in the system. This is how you fit in the program, et cetera, et cetera. But that conversation that happens every couple days, every day, every week, every other week, depending on what recruit you're talking to, is more about real life. I mean, because honestly, at the end of the day, most recruits are attracted to the relationship part of this conversation, right? Obviously, there's the, what can a school provide for me? What can a coach provide for me? All that great stuff. But those conversations that you have every couple of days are usually about what's going on with the family. How's school going? How's the season going? How's preparation going? The workouts, all that type of stuff, the interests off of the field. And that process, that relationship building process, Brandon, is what really sticks for a lot of recruits, because they want to know that a coach cares for them more than just a player with a number on the back. They want to know that they care about them as a person. So you'll see those relationships build more and more over time. And it's hardly ever about football after a while. It's more about them from a personal level. So that's kind of the everyday or every couple day relationships. And then what do you say in an in-home versus over text? I mean, again, I think that for me, and this is based upon conversations, is that there's a nuanced answer to this as far as what you text a recruit versus what you talk to them over the phone and what you see of them in person. It still comes spouting from the same message, right? The same message of the fits to the personal level stuff. But I think that when you're talking about in-home versus and that personal touch, you understand that there's some things that mean more face to face, right? There's stuff that means more and needs to be clarified on a call versus a text message. We all have been in the situation where you send a text message and you don't understand tone, right? Like it's almost impossible to understand tone from a text message. So I think that there's just that natural personal perspective, that personal touch, being able to talk to someone. And so I hope that answers it, right? I think that the biggest thing for me and the overlying conversation of most of these points is that this is a relationship building process. That's what recruiting is at the end of it. It's always about what a school can provide and how they fit. Those things are always very important. But I really think that the closers that we see are the guys that can build that relationship and the players that buy into the fact that this guy cares about me more than just a football player. It's a personal perspective. It's a family perspective. So hopefully that answered. I know that was a lot of talking and a lot of different vantage points, but I think relationships is obviously a big part of the deal for recruiting.
All right, let's go. We had a super chat down here, Ryan, from The Real Coconut.
The Real Coconut, thank you so much for the question. Weird thing I noticed, LSU's last 3 titles came when the title game was in New Orleans, and they played for another in New Orleans in 2011. So unless there was a title game in New Orleans soon, BK ain't winning a title.
So I'm looking here now. The next time that they play, it's through right now. The locations are set through 2026, and they do not play in either one there in either. So this year was Los Angeles. Next year it's Houston. The year after that it's Atlanta, and the year after that it's Miami. I do think it's BS that they don't have more northern places, and I understand why. Blah 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 blah. But why is it not good to have football played in cold weather? I don't understand that. Right? I mean. So I know Indianapolis should have a shot there. I understand why Detroit doesn't, if I'm being honest. They need to find some, and it doesn't even have to be north like Ohio, Indiana. But I mean, even if it's like Tennessee or,
right,
Kansas City or something where it's just not always in the southeast, where it's basically a borderline home game for the SEC team almost every year. Mm-hmm. So now obviously this year it wasn't, but in a lot of years that tends to be the case. So. Yeah, it looks like they won't. I don't think that's going to be the reason they don't win a title, though.
I mean, let's hope.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be the reason why.
John A1 with another question. Thank you, John. Going into 2023, all the returning tight ends seem to be very different players. Agree. But which one does the offseason need to be the rock of the room to complement the other elements of the offseason to offense to maximize it? Excuse me. I'm just thinking, honestly. It's a nuanced question. It's a good question, John.
The thing for me, John, is John always comes up with great questions. The thing for me is I think if you're going to ask me which ones they need one guy that's a bigger blocker, traditional tight end guy, shouldn't be Mitchell Evans, and then they need a guy that's a little bit of a do a few different things type of guy, which is Holden Stace. I think that's the ideal combination at tight end. The reason that I'm not saying Eli Raridan is because I just don't know when Eli Raridan is going to be back.
Yeah.
I mean, he came back real quick the last time, and it ended up tears the same knee again. That's a big – and it was, over a month into the season. I mean, he played against North Carolina. So, actually, he played against BYU, didn't he?
I think
I'm trying to remember what was the first game that he missed. It was like halfway through the season. He played 5 games. So he got hurt before the Stanford game. No, he got hurt. He played against Stanford. So he got hurt in October. Same knee that he hurt in December. Yeah. So that's going to make it real tough for him to be back in time to play anything more than half the year. And if he does get back sooner, it's like, but he's a fast healer. Yeah, that's what they said last year, and look what happened. So sometimes those kid passes all the medical exams, and I don't blame the Notre Dame staff. I promise you they're not putting that kid out on the field if he doesn't pass every single test imaginable to being able to play. Just sometimes
I would hope not.
There's just certain things in medicine you can't predict the future. You can't know certain things. It's you can't look at a ligament and just say, gee, this one's going to tear. I mean, sometimes you can, but a lot of times you can't.
Because not all are the same, right?
Right, so, right. And so, I don't fault them for it, but I'm going to be – you need to get this kid healthy. If that means he has to redshirt to all of next year, fine. I truly don't care about that because the key is that's a really talented kid who you need to make sure is healthy. Yes. That can, as best you can, is ready to play moving forward. And so that's why, to me, I'm looking at tight end thinking right now that the expectations are this is a Mitchell Evans, Holden Stace group. I'm not real high on Kevin Bauman. He's a good number 3 tight end. Blocks. So the problem with Kevin Bauman, he doesn't block well enough for a guy that moves like he moves.
Yeah.
Right. His game needs to be about blocking, and he's not a very good blocker right now. And that's makes it hard for me to kind of push for him.
Well, and when someone says the rock of the room, I always think about experience factor, right? Sure. And that conversation. So, I mean,
that's
naturally
Mitchell
the first,
Evans,
the first guy that popped in my head was Mitchell Evans is a guy that stepped up at the end of the season when Michael Mayer wasn't there, and he's the oldest guy in the room. Not the oldest guy in the room, but he has the most experience out of all the guys in the room.
And what position did he play in high school?
Play quarterback, man.
Quarterback. I mean, so there's there's just a natural leadership that comes from playing that position, from a communication, from an accountability standpoint. And so that factors into it as well.
And he's the quarterback on quarterback sneaks. So
agree. There you go. You can take a snap under center. That's all you needed to say right there.
From Irish Blooded, with the wrinkle, everyone is healthy. With the wrinkle, everyone is healthy, and Tyler Buchner is the starter. Which running back finishes the season next year with the most total touchdowns? Would you have a different answer if Hartman is the starter?
No.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be Aldrich Estime no matter what.
Yeah.
I mean, just like this year.
He's that hammer, man. He's that hammer. Yeah.
You get him inside the 5-yard line. I don't know who else you'd want at running back. And that's not a knock on Logan Diggs. Logan Diggs might be the guy that got you down there.
Yeah.
Right. But it's all going to be Aldrich Estime, no matter who the quarterback is.
Yeah. And I was going to say I don't think Hartman changes it because, yes, the running scheme might be a little different if it's Hartman versus a Tyler Buchner just because of the quarterback run game implications. But at the end of the day, you're not changing your offense so much
because that's the only change, Ryan. The only change is you're still running counter, but now the counter with an RPO with Sam Hartman, counter with the quarterback keep with Tyler Buchner.
Yep, it's just going to look differently. Yeah,
I think the question there that would be more debatable would be is if Tyler Buchner's a starter, hypothetically, who's the leading who leads the team in rushing touchdowns? Is it a running back or is it Tyler Buchner?
That's true.
I think that would be the better conversation to have. In that, because what do you have? 3 in 3 games, or 4 in 3 games?
Yeah,
might have had 4 in 3 games. Let me look it up because I know I think he had 4 because he scored against Ohio State, correct? Or was it Estime that scored against Ohio State? I think it was Estime that scored against Ohio State.
Was it Estime?
I'm trying to look.
Oh yeah, it was because he jumped over the pile, right? Wasn't it like a leap?
Yeah, right. Yeah, Buchner had 4 rushing touchdowns in he had 2 against Marshall and 2 against South Carolina. So he had 4 in 3 games. That's, again, I'm not great at math, but I'm pretty sure that's going to be more than 11 if he'd have played in 13 games. You know what I mean?
That would be
17.
That would be 17. Yeah. I was going to say it would be 16 and 12. So
right. Yep. And then Aldrich Estime this year had 11. Now the running backs as a whole had 18 this year.
Yeah.
And so that would not play out that way. He's not going to have 2 touchdowns or touchdown and a half in every game.
Sure.
But I think that would be the more debatable conversation for me to have on that one.
Yeah. From Broke Neck Boy. Nice. Mailbag. Is CJ Stroud going to the draft or is he actually coming back? If so, what are the chances now we beat Ohio State? So the latest I heard on CJ Stroud is that the rumors popping up everywhere because Monday is the deadline to declare for the 2023 NFL draft. He has not done so at this point. So there's that conversation piece. I ultimately do think he enters, but I'm not 100% sure. Like I thought it was a foregone conclusion like a month ago, but now we're sitting here and it's still kind of a talking point. So we'll see if it happens. As for the chances, if it beats Ohio State, it betters your chances if he isn't the quarterback next year, right?
Sure.
Right.
It'd be stupid to say it doesn't change. Look, Notre Dame can beat Ohio State next year no matter who their quarterback is. Does it become much harder with CJ Stroud? Obviously.
No doubt. Yeah.
Obviously.
Kid's thrown 80-something touchdowns last 2 years.
It's a heck of a player.
Yeah.
And I'll say this. If he can carry over the style of play that he showed against Georgia into next season, That's going to make him even better because he's a quality athlete. He just doesn't run. And they finally got him out of the pocket. It was a really good game plan. They got him out of the pocket. They got him on the move a little bit, and he was a really impactful player. So I'd still be surprised, but I'll just say this, Ryan, without giving away too much. NIL could be a big reason why he stays. CJ is making good money, and there's a chance he's going to make even more money by staying.
Yeah.
Having said that, his game can improve. There's no doubt. But do you really want to go into I think you got a better chance of being drafted ahead of Will Levis and Bryce Young than you have of being drafted ahead of Caleb Williams next year, in my opinion. That's just I
think it's fair. I mean, regardless, he's probably going to go top 10, right? So the question is now NIL money versus first-year rookie contract money, right? I guess if that's your conversation piece, which first-year rookie contract money is going to outweigh that if you're a top 10 pick. But, yeah.
That's right. And, like some of the early mock draft. Now, here's the debate, however, is there's a chance he could be the third quarterback in this year's class, whereas next year, I don't know if right now there's anyone you're going to look at besides Caleb Williams as Drake a potential, May. Right? Maybe Drake May, maybe.
Don't forget about Quinn Ewers, man.
Right. Exactly. You have like KJ Jefferson, guys like that.
Yeah.
Drake May, maybe. Right. I still want to see Drake May continue to grow and develop and build as a player. But, that's kind of one of the ones that you look at. But other than that, it's kind of like, I'm not really sure. This is wild. The mock drafts are so wild. Did you see the one? Did you ever seen like WalterFootball.com? Ever seen that one?
I try not to. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I do it for comedy, to be completely honest with you.
So bad. Yeah.
And so I just pulled up his 2024 mock draft just to get names because it was the first one that popped up. He has a Notre Dame player going in the first round of the Detroit Lions next year. Did you know that?
I did not know that. No.
It's a linebacker. Yep. A Notre Dame linebacker.
JT?
Nope.
No. Marist?
Nope.
Jack Kaiser.
Yep.
Jack Kaiser the first one. Come on, man. Come on. Come on, Walter.
Oh, my goodness gracious. Yes. Hilarious. Hilarious.
It's okay. There was another mock draft that had Rocco Spindler in the third round, even though he hadn't played.
Yes, I saw that.
So,
that was the one that had the entire Ohio State starting defensive line going in the first round next year.
Yes, like the top 20 as well. So, yeah.
Right. Here's speaking of Ohio State, here is a super chat. Thank you very much from Mike Farino, who is an Ohio State fan, and he has left questions before. Has been a good contributor to us in the past. So here is his comment in regard to Javontae Jean-Baptiste. Right.
From Mike, I am an Ohio State fan. He was great here. A lot of teams weren't thrilled with him, but that's due to expectations. A lot of fans weren't thrilled with him, but that was due to expectations. He was a defensive end following up to the Bosas and Chase Young. So obviously expectations for any defensive end were high and impossible to hit.
Look, Ohio State fans I know Ohio State fans. I know who want CJ Stroud to move on.
Mm-hmm.
I know Ohio State fans who are ready to toss TreVeyon Henderson to the side. These are the same people that said last year that what was the comment about Marvin Harrison it was just like, seriously, like what are we talking about here? It just was. There's so much absurdity. And Mike, I think you would agree with me on this. Every fan base has an absurd, but part of the reason that I dislike a lot of the Ohio State fan base is because, number one, they're really just a little nutty, to be completely honest with you, especially the ones in Ohio. Their expectations are incredibly unreal, and when the guy doesn't meet their unreal expectations, they're mean about it. Have you seen at all some of the way that CJ Stroud gets treated on social media by Ohio State fans?
It's wild, man.
It is nuts. It is nuts. And that's the thing is, like, I don't know why he would want to stay. That doesn't, I don't get that. But but that's the thing is, so the expectations piece is I mean, look, they recruited some really talented players that were playing in front of him. 5-star guys, Zach Harrison's a 5-star guy. JT's a 5-star guy. Jack Sawyer's a 5-star guy. And he still cracked the rotation and had good production. I mean, his production was on par with all those guys.
Yep.
if you look at it. So, but
He's going to be
I don't. He doesn't have that
be a
ceiling
good
that they
player,
have.
man. He's
Yeah,
going to
it's
be a good player.
Not an elite player. If you're expecting him to come and be Isaiah Foskey, I just don't think that's who he is. Now, he could surprise us, sure.
Right.
But,
I mean, I'll hope for the best, but I mean, it's one of those situations where I just don't get your hopes up, man. He's going to be a good football player.
Yeah.
He's going to be the all-time leading sacker in Notre Dame history, like Isaiah Foskey. Like, no,
right. Tende had a comment, and I didn't even mean it this way, but I love how Tende picked it up. He goes, "A little nutty equals Buckeye." Yeah, I didn't even think about that, Tende. That was not even part of it, but very well played there. Very well played there.
Yeah.
But I mean, and Mike Farino, who's on the host, said the hate for Ruggles for failing to hit a 50-yarder was insane. Do you remember the tight end that dropped that pass against Texas back in the day? Do you remember that play, Ryan, when they played Texas in 05?
Mm-hmm.
And he was getting death threats.
Was it who was that? I know you're talking about, though.
Yeah, I don't even remember the name of the kid, but like he was getting death threats from Ohio State fans for dropping that pass. And it's just like that's a insane group of people right there, man. And look, I grew up in it, so I can speak. My family members that are part of that, you know what I mean? So it's a wild group. It is a very, very wild group. I'm looking at, was it Ryan Hamby?
Hamby,
that sounds
right.
was?
Sounds right.
Yeah.
Hamby, yeah.
Yeah.
Noah Ruggles was good this year too, wasn't he?
He was money his whole career, man. I mean, he just first of all, they put him in a bad spot. They should not have. Their failure to get more yards on that drive was a coaching failure, not a Noah Ruggles failure. I think the thing that probably might, this is just a guess, but the thing that might tick people off more is it was so off. It wasn't even close.
It was a terrible kick. It was a terrible
I
kick,
mean,
no
but he was a guy that to me didn't necessarily have a booming leg. He was more accurate, and that's why it's important to get. If they could have got 5 more yards, I think he nails it. But yeah, he went 14 of 19 this year, Ryan. He went 16 of 20. I'm sorry, that's Notre Dame. Sorry, give me a second. I was like, I don't know. I thought he was better than that. Let's see here. Let's go to Ohio State. Noah Ruggles. He only missed, I think, 1 field goal last year. I don't know specifically what he was this year. I know he's pretty good. He went 17 of 20 this year, Ryan. 17 of 19
85%.
Right, exactly. That was before the missed kick. He went 3 for 3 against Michigan, and he had nailed his first 2 field goals against Georgia. And then, let's see, in 2021, he went 20 of 21. So you're talking about a kid over the last 2 years that went, 37 and 41 for 41. It's pretty flipping good.
Doesn't suck.
It's pretty flipping good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Can you imagine a Notre Dame kicker going 37 to 41 in a 2-year span?
Justin Yoon wasn't that far off.
Yeah, no, he was good. He was a good kicker.
Justin Yoon was an 80+% guy as well.
Yeah.
But yeah.
From Tyler Evans, Super Chat. Thank you, Tyler. Who has the rudest fans and nicest fans in college football? Oh, man, we're going here, huh? We're going here.
Rudest? I mean, it may be Ohio State. When I say rude, because like here's an example. Georgia fans online are intolerable.
Yes.
They're
who else is? Oklahoma fans are very intolerable on Twitter as well.
But I've met a lot of Georgia fans in person, and they're awesome. Like, they were great when they came here in 17. They were great when we went down there in 19. And to me, that better represents the fan base than people online or the morons that send letters back in the day. I hate you and all that. Like, those people are psychopaths, and every fan base has those. I mean, the documentary with the Notre Dame did where they talked about Tony Rice and all that stuff showed that. There were Notre Dame fans that said ignorant stuff to him. You know what I mean? But the majority are not that way. And that's kind of how I feel about Georgia fans. I've met a lot of Georgia fans in my life, and they are great. Their online fans suck. But you know who else's fan base sucks online? Just about everybody else.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And so, Twitter sucks. I'm talking about Twitter and social media. It sucks. It brings out the worst in people. But Ohio State fans in person are just not nice people. Like, just really not nice people. And really disrespectful people, in my opinion. So they're up there for me, Ryan. But I also haven't met every fan base. USC fans are just like whatever. Like they're not that bad. Michigan fans are pretty bad. Ohio State fans are worse. I'm trying to think of South. I didn't have any issues with South Carolina fans when I was there, but I didn't kind of come into contact with many of them. Clemson fans have always been really cool in person.
I agree with that one. I've met some Clemson fans that I thought were actually very nice people.
Yeah, very cool, very cool people. Like I said, Georgia, Florida State fans were pretty obnoxious, to be honest with you, in 14. I don't know how obnoxious they are now, but they were pretty bad. But I've had a lot of issues with Ohio State fans. Like they're just not nice. Utah fans, nicest. I mean, like I said, the Georgia and Clemson fans were both really cool in person. Utah fans were awesome.
I believe that.
They were great. Like we had Utah fans coming up to our tailgate when they played them in 2010. So I'd probably go with Utah just for my personal experience. I can only speak from personal experience. This is all anecdotal. I can't speak to what others experience or whatever. I can only share my personal experience, and it is definitely Utah fans for me. And there's Navy fans are great. There's been a lot of good fan bases that I've come to contact with. Cincinnati fans were annoying last year.
Yes, they were.
Annoying.
Yes, they
very
were.
Annoying.
Agree.
So, but Navy fans are great. Utah fans are great.
Around where I live, there's a lot of Penn State fans, and I've actually never had a problem with a Penn State fan. They're fine.
I did in Pennsylvania.
Did you?
When I lived in Pennsylvania, Penn State fans are really annoying, but they're not mean. They're just annoying, right? Yeah. It's just they're total homers. Like you could have evidence of something bad right in front of your face, and they're like, who cares? It's not true. It's spin. Like, oh, okay. I literally have like photographic evidence of this happening.
Good call on Navy though, because I remember when I went down to the Baltimore game or whatever this year, they were extremely nice. All the people tailgating
Navy fans
and stuff.
They're great.
They're very nice.
They're great
nice people
because they accept their lot in life, right? And
Syracuse fans were nice too.
They were cool
in New York. They were nice.
Cool. Yeah, they were cool. All right, John A1 with another one.
Is it more key for Aiden Keanaaina to have a full recovery for the defensive line in 2023 or have a dominant Viper at that spot?
For me, I mean, full recovery doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a great player. So I'm going to add a little bit onto it. Like, does he recover and become like a guy that can give you 30 good snaps a game or a dominant Viper? My thing is, I'll give me a pretty good trio of the guys that are coming back, but no one's dominant, and a 315-pound nose guard that can give you some good minutes. I'd take that. I'm a believer that if you give me a really good four-man D-line, give me that over a team that's got two pretty darn good players, one elite player and one guy that's not good. One that's just a problem. I'm a big believer in football of completeness, and I would take that. So that would be my pick. What say you?
I think for me, I have the biggest question marks about nose compared to where Viper is right now, if I'm being honest, right? Because Howard Cross was a good football player in 2022 for Notre Dame, but again, he's 275 pounds. I think that he's a better player if you're able to move him around a little bit. Like, I don't want him to play like a crazy bulk at nose, right? And I have hope for guys like Gabriel Rubio, Aiden Keanaaina, if he can come back healthy and be a part of the solution, right? Like, I think that there's some guys that have questions that they can answer, but for me, I still personally feel I'm optimistic about what the Viper position is going to look like, man. Like, I think Patelho, Burnham, Gabira, like that, I think they're going to be good. I really do. Yeah. I think there would be a good unit. So
Agreed.
No, I have more question marks with nose personally right now.
I got a fan base that just popped in my head.
Uh-oh.
That is surprisingly really bad. I thought they'd be really nice. They were Northwestern's fans in person are awful.
That's interesting.
So my wife did photography for that game.
Yeah.
And if she'd have told me during the game some of the things that they yelled to her and other women on the sideline, I would have gotten arrested that night.
Seriously?
Yes. Yes.
That's
I would have got arrested. I would have gone down there and beat the absolute out of a couple people. Yeah. I'd probably gone to my car and got a tire iron to do it too. I'm not going to lie.
That's wild.
Yeah. I'm not talking like, oh, Notre Dame sucks. I'm talking like some really graphic, disrespectful stuff. And she wasn't the only one, but it was of course, like normal cowards. It was to women. They were yelling it to women. Right. But yeah, if she'd have told me stuff that was yelled at her during the game, I would have gone down there and done some things that would have got me arrested. I'm not going to lie to you.
Gotcha.
I'm not joking either. I'm not being hyperbolic at all. I'm being serious. Wild. So, yeah. And because it reminded me, Adam Blair said that. I heard Northwestern is awful. Yeah.
You know who else is awful? Ladarius Martin and Alabama fans are all awful.
don't you speak that on my guy Ladarius, man. Come on
man.
now. Come on now. Yeah. Oh, Ladarius, I didn't have anything to do with that, man. All right, here we go. Here's another one.
We have one from Irish Blooded. Do you think Marcus Freeman, gave Tommy Rees too long of a leash this year or didn't involve himself fully enough in the offense early in the season? And could that have changed the Marshall-Stanford games?
I think the opposite is a little bit true on this, to be completely honest with you. I feel like there was a little bit too much involvement in the offense early.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of why there wasn't a really good comfort level early on. And we saw an offense that didn't really look like what we had seen from Tommy Rees in the past. And Coach Freeman has said this. I mean, he's said this publicly. I think the changes that helped Coach Rees later in the year weren't about and again, I'm not telling you something that the head coach hasn't already said. I'm just, okay. I think the changes that helped Coach Rees a lot later in the year with Coach Freeman weren't so much about strategy, but about how you're going about your business. And I think that's where Coach Rees needed the encouragement, kicking the pants, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's really sort of the master stroke that Coach Freeman had this year was when he got, because I will say, I think he gave him too long of a leash in that regard. Not so much in the offense as far as what they're doing structurally or schematically. I think it was not being more involved in how they're preparing. And I think that was true on both sides of the ball. I think he did the same thing without Golden. And I've said this before, the mistake that Coach Freeman made, and it was an understandable one, is happens a lot with first-year coaches, especially young ones, is as an assistant coach, Ryan, like when I was kind of getting to the point where I started to interview for coordinator jobs and head coaching jobs, it's like I have a way that I think things should be done. And it's the same thing when I started this business. I have a way that I think things should be done. And so part of the way that I treat you as an employee is I want to give you certain freedoms to do things and have your own liberties within the structure of what I want to do, right? Sure. Because that's what I wanted. Look, tell me what my job is and then let me go do it, right? Just let me go do it. Don't constantly be on me all the time about this and all these other things. I had a boss one time who was like literally in my phone room, like, oh God, what does he want now? Like, what did I do now? And it's just like, so part of how I interact with people that work for me and work with me is how I wanted to be treated when I did this job. And the same thing is true when I was in coaching. I would have been that way as a head coach if it would have got to that point. Well, sometimes you go in with that mindset. So, the mistake Coach Freeman made was he wasn't a player's coach. He was a coach's coach. So you're the head coach of your room kind of thing.
Sure.
And so, no, they're the running backs coach. You're the head coach of that room. And I think because he had the traits that he would have handled that well because of who he is. Not every coach is able to handle that the way that you would have. Right. And so that's why I've always believed like you've got to kind of set the agenda. You're involved. You're doing all these things. And then as they prove to you that they're capable of doing it the way you want to do it, then you give them the freedom to do it. Okay. And so I think that's a mistake that a young coach made that he kind of rectified during the season. And I don't think is going to be the same moving forward. And it's how certain coaches can kind of get away with not maybe being as effective on the recruiting trail because he gave them a level of I'm going to trust you to do the job and go do it. That I think in year 2 he won't be as trusting because I think he realized like not every coach is like me, right? Not every coach is there. Maybe he sits back and looks at, okay, well, where was I when I was Tommy Rees's age? That's 5-6 years ago. He was at Purdue. They were getting their butts kicked. Like okay, maybe I need to be. This is where I was trying to help him, but maybe I need to try to help him over here. Right. And that's part of that's whether you're a first-year coach or a 20-year coach. That's all part of the process. And so do I think that could have changed the Marshall-Stanford games? Marshall, no. Stanford, no. I think there were much bigger problems in those games than the game plan and play calling and much bigger problems. That team wasn't ready to play. That team showed no energy, no emotion. They never punched back when they got punched in the face. There was much bigger problems. Now, to Marcus Freeman's credit, Ryan, after that, he stepped in and said, okay, some things got to change around here.
No doubt.
And they did. And the team coming out of the Stanford game was a whole lot different than the team going into the Stanford game. And that's a credit to him. And to be able to do that as a first-year coach is impressive. Because when you're a first-year coach and something like that happens after Marshall, man, it could, okay, I'm in over my head, and I don't know what to do.
And players can quit too.
Yes, and yes, that's another point. And he pushed all the right buttons because what they were the next month was a much different team. And I think that's one of the – you ask why am I optimistic about Marcus Freeman when they went 9-4? It's stuff like that.
Yeah,
it's things like that say, okay, this guy understands. He has the chops, and which is why I think he's going to get things turned around really quickly. Now, I could be wrong, but that's why I feel the way that I feel. So very good question, I think, though. And
I think those actions also show that he can self-evaluate and understand that if there's mistakes made, that I need to fix those things, right? And I think that the big thing about learning is that you don't make the same mistake twice, but also you don't make the same mistake as quickly either, right? Like you're going to look at it and be like, I did this before and I failed at it, right? I'm going to start from here instead to make sure I don't make that same mistake over again. So I think there's just more self-awareness, if anything, also moving forward.
Yeah. Next question is from Broke Neck Boy. We already talked about that one. Here's one from Brandon Plensner.
Brandon Plesner says, do you think Notre Dame would take 6 defensive linemen in the 2024 class? What's the number and what's your projected defensive line hole versus what you'd currently want it to be? Brian, we were talking about this on Monday a little bit. I think that there's a possibility that this class could get to 5. I think that 5's
I think it definitely gets to 5.
6, yeah. I don't know. 6, I mean, could it get to 6? It's possible. 5 seems like the number to me, though. I don't know. 6 is a lot.
6 is a lot, but as I look at the depth chart, you say you'd have to have at least one guy that can play something else.
Sure.
Like a hybrid type of guy.
Like a Sam Viper type of dude.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. What's my projected haul? It's too early to tell on that one. Yeah. I don't like giving projected recruiting classes in January, because if we'd have given a projected recruiting class 2 years ago, there's no Benjamin Morrison, there's no Tyson Ford, there's no Junior Tuihalamaka, there's no Jaden Mickey. Some of those guys even have offers yet. There's no Jalen Sneed. It's way too early to give a projected list. Every year, if you look at what the projected list is in January and then what it ends up being, it's rarely close to that.
Well, how about maybe a different way to look at it is the position projections?
Yeah.
Might be different to look at.
I think you need a nose.
Yes.
I think you need at least one interior guy, and you need 2 edges, meaning a pure big end and a pure Viper type, in my opinion. And then the 5th guy can be sort of who's that next best guy is kind of where I'd look at it.
Yeah.
I could see a scenario in which they take a couple Vipers.
Yes.
If one of those guys can play something else, whether it be a guy that could also play linebacker or a guy that could grow into a big end, that's when I look at Bryce Young, that's kind of what I think about him. Right now, he's a pure Viper body type wise, but if you know who his dad is and all those, and you see his hands and his feet and his shoulders, you're like, it wouldn't shock me if that kid ends up being like 265 when it's all said. And he may not, but because he's very, 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 very projectable. And I know that Brandon is way against taking him. But I've said this before. If you're taking 5, I have no problem taking Brandon Plensner.
Brandon Plensner?
I'm sorry. I would always take Brandon Plensner. I would have no problem taking Bryce Young.
That's awesome.
And he said that he'd take Marquise Lightfoot. And I get that because you're erring on the side of the floor. Marquise Lightfoot has a higher floor than Bryce Young. I believe that Bryce Young has the higher ceiling. The problem is that I have far less certainty that he gets there. Mm-hmm. But you only take Bryce Young, to me, if you plan to go to 5. That's the thing for me. But if you're talking about a projected class, and I'm using players to fit a role here, if I could see some scenario in which I took Young and Lightfoot and TJ Lindsey and Justin Scott, and then give me a guy that's kind of a true end type of player
to go with Owen Wafel already in the class.
Yeah. I mean, that actually, I keep forgetting about it. Owen Wafel. That would kind of get you to 6, right?
Yes.
So give me Scott, Wafel, and
Lightfoot and Young.
Lightfoot, Young, and who's the other kid that I just said? TJ Lindsey. Or the kid from Pennsylvania that he's offered as a nose. like one of those two kids. I think that's kind of the makeup of it. I think Lightfoot you got to consider taking because he could help you with Justin Scott, to be honest with you. But he's also a good football player. He's just not that high-level guy. But to me, honestly, end of the day, as long as you get me a good nose and Justin Scott, the rest of it I don't care a whole lot about, to be completely honest with you. That's the key for me right now. But I just got to see who else emerges as like I haven't here's the other part. I haven't broken down Benedict Ume's film yet.
Yeah.
I haven't predicted that kid that you wrote the article about yesterday whose name I can't pronounce. I haven't broken his film down yet. So it's really too early for me to project. But it's also like some of these kids haven't been on campus yet. It's so early in the process that I just think it's way too early for us to kind of be panicking about like who might end up in the class. Now, you got to start getting some things in gear at the coaching standpoint there, but just overall, I'm not quite worried about that yet. But as long as Justin Scott's in this class, I'm good.
That's the crown jewel in this class, man. That's the guy that you need to get.
Yep.
That's the difference maker on the interior that you need desperately, in my opinion.
Yep. All right, here's the next question here. This is a good one from Tommy.
From Tommy Guns, how much does the depth at receiver benefit from the quarterback battle during spring and fall camp? How much does it
benefit? I don't know if it benefits from the battle. I think where it benefits is from like a skill set standpoint, but where I think it benefits is growing confidence, because I think the battle at quarterback, Ryan, is oftentimes brings out the best in both quarterbacks, usually. And if it doesn't, it means that's why that guy's not in the conversation. But, I don't think Drew Pine, and we talked about this on this show, I don't think Drew Pine handled the battle well in the spring and early fall. It's why he turned the ball over so much, because I think he felt he was pressing. Because I think he knew if I don't start making some plays, I'm going to get beat out. He knew that Tyler was better than him. It's just started taking more and more risks, and then those risks led into more and more mistakes. And so, it doesn't always, but I think in this situation it'll be one of those instances where it brings out the best. And so, what that does for the receivers is that gives them a great deal of confidence that, hey, I got quarterbacks that are going to get me the ball. They're going to throw that ball out there. They're going to take chances. They're going to do this. I got to be ready to play.
Right.
And then it also gives you a great deal of confidence going into the season about saying, hey, I don't care who the quarterback is, because both of these guys can get me the ball. And if something does happen to one guy over the other, you're feeling good because they're both playmakers. And I don't think there was necessarily that same level of, like, the players loved and respected Drew Pine, but I don't think they thought like, Drew's the quarterback now, I'm going to catch 1 million balls now. I don't think anybody thought that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of,
and I would say this too is an underlying thing that we haven't talked about enough, in my opinion, is that Sam Hartman's going to come here with a lot of confidence, right? He's throwing 110 touchdowns in his career. Like, he's going to come here with that aura around him. And I think that helps Tyler, right? Tyler's going to look at that and be like, I need to match that guy. And you don't have to press, but it's like one of those things like, I need to have my best day today, right? Like, I need to have another great day. I need to stack days. So I think it helps everyone around him having Sam Hartman in there, because that's going to bring the best out of players.
Absolutely.
From a wide receiver perspective, and also from the competition at the quarterback spot as well.
Yep. So I'm gonna address the second part of this one, Ryan. So I'll read this one real quick from Tyler Ehrig. So thank you, Tyler. He says, seems like we are out on the Utah State kid, but haven't heard any other names being besides him recently. So as of right now, there's still some players that Notre Dame is talking to. Obviously, we're not going to put names out. Right now, I can't say that there's going to be another guy added in this part of the portal process. There's going to be more kids that jump in after spring ball.
Yes.
And there will be another round of this in the spring. I could see them adding a guy then. Right now, I think they're kind of set with who they have. Regarding the Utah State kid, that would be Byron Vaughn's. Ryan, what we were told several days ago is that they basically decided they were going to go in a different direction. It was kind of Javontae Jean-Baptiste or nothing. And the reason why is because Byron Vaughn's is a pure Viper. And they didn't want a guy that's a pure Viper. They want a guy that can play multiple roles, more of a big end kind of guy. And as you and I discussed at the beginning of the show, that's where we see his game. I think what happens sometimes, Ryan, and there was a conversation about this in the chat, is sometimes people get too obsessed on what a guy's body type is or what his size is, and then they project him to a position. And so I think some people look at Javontae Jean-Baptiste and say Viper because he's built a lot like Isaiah Foskey, height, weight-wise on a roster. He looks more like a Viper than a big end. He doesn't play that way, though. He doesn't play like a Viper. And that's the problem. If you're going to project him to Vipers, his game doesn't scream Viper. Byron Vaughn's game is pure Viper.
Yes. And
that's the difference, because they weren't looking for a pure Viper. They were looking for a guy that can do multiple things. And I think Jean-Baptiste can, like I said, can play a little bit of that Justin Adamiola role, but also is a guy that, number one, is a guy that is a defensive end. And that's why I think he was the guy they went with. Are there some other receivers and some different guys they're looking at and talking to? Yes. Do I think any of them are going to pull the trigger right now? No, I don't. I think this is kind of what their thing is going to be. Unless there's some sort of change of heart or change of direction here over the next few days, right? Because they start class Monday.
Yes.
Now, there's a window where guys don't have to start right on time, that if a guy picked next Thursday, if the window's still open, I have to look at the date. What's the 13th? 14, 15, 16. So the portal window closes on like Wednesday, correct? The 18th. But there's some rule about within certain days of class starting or whatever. But the point is they need to get someone by the middle of next week. Barring a change of heart or something, I don't see that happening right now. Do I think they'll look back in the portal again in May? Yes, I think they will reevaluate things. If Notre Dame is not active in the portal in May, that's a great thing. Because what that means is a lot of young guys really stepped up in the spring and the need isn't there anymore. And so if they're dipping back into the portal in May, it means that some dudes didn't pan out or there are some injuries. And that's not necessarily a good thing. I'm actually kind of good with where they are right now, Ryan, personally.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think there's another portal need right now. When we get through spring ball, that could change. Could change.
I think you hit all your major needs for the most part, right? Like you got a big end that can come in and play. You got your quarterback, obviously a high profile one at that. You got your nickel safety that can kind of do a little bit of everything. And then you got another veteran wide receiver and Caleb Smith out of Virginia Tech. So I think you hit your needs, man. I mean, there's going to be needs that probably arise for some different reasons, kind of like what you're stating. But I think for right now, I'm very content with where Notre Dame is going into winter workouts.
Agree. Here we go. Here's another one from Irish Blooded.
Irish Blooded. I think the battle of Burnham versus Batelho next year is going to be amazing. I want to see Josh become a beast.
I want to see them both do that.
Yes.
I think in today's game, Ryan, we focus way too much on who's the starter.
One guy, yeah.
And at most positions, that's not really relevant anymore. Like one of the questions we had, and I don't know if I started or not, was like, do you think Estime becomes the true 1A back? And I'm like, why does it matter?
Yeah.
Like, why are we still talking about this? Like, did you not watch Logan Diggs in the bowl game? Like, there are still some people in the bowl game that will watch that bowl game and watch Logan Diggs go for 75 yards on a catch, go for rip off a 39-yard touchdown run, and still be like, he's getting the ball too much. You need to give it more to Estime because they're team Estime for some reason. Here's what I know. I hope that none of the backs become 1A, because that means other guys didn't necessarily continue to grow. I hope they all get so much better that you still are like, dude, we just got to find ways to get them all the ball. That's what I want. And then ride the hot hand. Some weeks that's going to be Logan Diggs. Some week that's going to be Audric Estime. Some weeks that may be Jadarian Price or Chris Tyree. I don't care. Play them all.
Yeah.
And be good, because if you're playing them all, then it's hard to game plan for Notre Dame, because Audric and Logan are very different players.
Yes.
And Chris Tyree's different from both of them. And if they're all rolling, like think about every game where all three backs made impact plays, Notre Dame lit people up. North Carolina, right? Clemson, and South Carolina. It's about the only three games all year where all three of them lit people up. And they scored 45, 35 with some help, and 45 in those two games, in those three games. And in one of the games, they scored 35 points, 28 defensively, or 21 offensively because of some short fields, but they scored 35 points, and they threw for 86 flipping yards against one of the best front sevens in college football, right? So use them all. Absolutely use them all. And the same thing is here. And I don't think that's what Irish Blooded is saying. I'm just saying I see a lot of this. Like, I'm a Batelho guy. Okay, great. I want Burnham to be the guy. Okay. Why is it one or the other? I want them both to be great. I want this to look a lot like the Dalen Hayes, Julian Aguara thing in 2018, where it's like, who's the better player? I don't know. Which game? But they're both really good.
Right.
And that's what to me is going to make this team the best next year is that Josh Burnham and Jordan Patel and Junior Tuihalamaka all step up and are ready to be playmakers. Because there's going to be some weeks where Burnham is going to be the guy you want, and some weeks where it's like, this is a game for Patelho to really go off. And hopefully more and more games, it's both of them.
And if it is a nice split, kind of a shared approach, it also saves people going down the stretch of the season, which is most important, right? Guys don't break. I was thinking about that with the running back position, right? One, for the season next year, you don't want Audric to be the guy or Logan to be the guy, and then they start to wear down at the end of the season because they got 200-something carries, right, at that point. It's like similar thing going to the NFL, right? Like I don't want a running back that has a bunch of tread on the tires. I want them to be fresh because that usually lasts a little longer. Mm-hmm. And I think that when you look at that, it's like I want Patello and Burnham to be playing great football. I want all these. I don't think there's going to be a couple of positions where you have a guy that is the volume getter on the depth chart, right? That's the guy that's going to be playing 80% of the snaps, right? Like there's going to be that guy. But for the most part, I want guys defensively to be able to have a little bit of a timeshare with some other dudes. I want there to be a good rotation because I want to save those guys. Like if Joshua Burnham is the dude, I still want him to be the dude in game 13 next year and just not in game 4. And then he's just okay the rest of the season, right? Like I want the guys to peak at the right time. And I don't mind doing timeshares as long as it keeps them the best at the end of the season.
So 10-Day said RB by committee also keeps him healthy. I want to point to that. Number one is because I am curious to see what Audric Estime's conditioning level is going to be like. Here's my thing. He's a very tightly wound athlete, like very muscular. The problem is guys like that sometimes don't have the work volume capacity that other guys have.
Because they take a lot of hits.
Yes. Yep. And because the way that their body's built, they just fatigue faster. And part of me wonders if that's partly why the Notre Dame staff didn't always use Audric early in games and saved him for later. I wonder if they've seen something like that. This is pure speculation, but I wonder based on how they used him, if they don't have the GPS numbers to show this kid wears down a little faster because of how it's built. Right? Not that he's not strong or whatever, but just sometimes guys that are really tightly wound, like muscular guys, can just fatigue a little bit faster. Not always. So I'm curious about that. But then 10-Day followed it up with this, and he said, it's okay to say, to say 10-Day pointed it out, Ryan.
10-Day. Joke's on you, sir. I wasn't looking at the chat. It was my thought.
I just say it's great minds think alike.
100%.
That's
100%.
That's what
I was thinking it long before he put it in the chat, though. So.
But he was thinking it long before he put it in the chat, too, right?
Sure.
So there we go from Coach Koch.
All right, we have what is the over-under on players drafted in this draft? Did last year's draft go as you predicted? Last year's draft did not fully go how I predicted.
For Notre Dame, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about, yeah.
Like I thought Kevin Austin was going to get drafted for one, right? Like that was one miss that I had in last year. For this year, Coach Koch, I mean, so if we're working through it, Michael Mayer's going to be a first-round pick. I don't think it's a slam dunk as we once thought that Isaiah Foskey is a first-round pick. I think he's more a top 50 to 75 guy at the end of the day. I think there's a possibility that he might go second round, just based upon what I'm hearing, right? So that's the two mainstays on the offensive line. I mean, on the draft class for Notre Dame. After that, I'm trying to think of who else. Brandon Joseph will probably get drafted, but somewhere on day 3. I don't think he's a day 2 player like I thought he could be, or a day 1 player. Like he's not that guy.
Ryan, so far you've talked Mayer, Foskey,
Joseph,
Jared Patterson.
Jared Patterson will definitely get drafted. The medicals is going to be a thing for him that I want to see, right? Because I know that there were some injuries in his past. I think he still gets drafted. I'd say he's more like a top 150 kid right now. So like 4th round, 3rd round, somewhere in that ballpark. But those 3 guys, I think all 4 of them will definitely get drafted. Is he in the
Senior Bowl?
He is in the Senior Bowl, yes.
If he has a good Senior Bowl, I could see him skyrocket.
It's possible.
I think so.
Because he's played a lot of football at a school that typically develops great offensive linemen. He's played multiple positions. So it's possible. It's possible.
Yeah. I think there's some concerns about just how good he is. Like, you know, he's always been really good, but never been great.
Yes.
And he never took that next step. And then this year he was hurt a lot. So I think the medical part, but if he goes to the Senior Bowl, and really plays well, I could see him have a Robert Hainsey type of jump, because Robert Hainsey wasn't a guy that people were projecting as a third rounder prior to the Senior Bowl either.
No, that's true.
And they're very comparable players in a lot of different ways to me.
Yep.
I think Jarrett's a little bit more athletic than Robert was. I think Robert is more he had less of an injury. He had the one injury at Notre Dame where he got landed on incorrectly, but I think Robert was a little bit more, trying to think of how to say this, longer, I think, and a little bit more sound, and had more moments of, boy, that guy was really good during that stretch period of time.
I agree with that.
But Jarrett, I think, has the better God-given ability. But Robert went to the Senior Bowl, played center guard, and was excellent all week at both positions. And that's what boosted him way up. So it just not everybody viewed Robert Hainsey as a third-round pick, but the Bucs fell in love with him. The Eagles fell in love with him. So they were teams that were going to take him higher. And I think I could see with a great Senior Bowl something like that happening for Jarrett Patterson as well, in my view.
Agree.
Do you see Tariq Bracy, or – because I think we both agree Justin Ademilola is probably a priority free agent.
I forgot about Jason. Jason's a day 3 player. Probably he'll get drafted. I think Justin, Tariq Bracy, Josh Lugg, and Chris Smith all get camp opportunities. I think they'll all get an opportunity in that. And regard. Maybe
sneak into the back end of the draft if a team falls in love with them.
And Avery Davis is another one that he'll be in a camp. There's no doubt. Yeah. He'll be in a camp.
Could you see a scenario in which Tariq gets picked?
I just think the lack of good film consistently throughout his career. Like he had a great final year and a pretty solid year before that.
He was pretty good last year. I do. I think he was pretty good last year.
Yeah.
I think the thing for him is going to be the testing.
Yeah.
He's going to have to test really well.
Yeah.
The testing is going to
he should test pretty well though, right?
Speed. Yeah, he'll be a 4.4 guy.
Yeah.
He'll be a 4.4 guy.
Which doesn't as much matter for nickels. Like they're going to be looking at like that short area, change of direction stuff, explosiveness stuff. But yeah.
Yep.
And John Sott. John Sott will definitely be in the camp. Sorry.
Yes. Yes. Seth Clark.
What is your favorite position group going into 2023? And what position do you think looks the best for the future of Notre Dame football?
Well, I mean, my favorite right now, my favorite's always quarterback, right? Like just bias. But as far as just specifically about Notre Dame, taking my bias away, it's the offensive line, because I think the offensive line is going to have the greatest impact on how good this team is going to be, because the offensive line, here's why people say, why is offensive line so important? It's not a question I get often asked, but I do get asked it from time to time. Why is there this obsession on offensive line? Because offensive line, more than any other position, including quarterback, can have an impact on every other position. And what makes offensive line unique is not only can they impact the quarterback, the running back, and the receivers, is they can impact the defense, your own defense. And so to me, that's if this offensive line is what we hope it is, then it makes every group around them better, including the front seven on defense. Because if you're not bringing it every day and really improving your game, you're going to get embarrassed. And that's what a great group can do. Is not just that if you got a great receiving core, your secondary has to be locked in every day, mechanically, fundamentally, emotionally, all that. Because if you don't, you're going to get embarrassed. It's the same thing here with this offensive line from Notre Dame. If you don't bring it every day, you're going to get embarrassed, because they're just that good, or should be that good. So for me, it's the offensive line. And when I look, I'll let you answer that first, Ryan, and then we'll talk about what the best for the future.
No, it's a quick movement here, because mine was going to be offensive line. Because I just think that there's not as many. The importance of Notre Dame, which you spoke to, but also I just don't think that there's a ton of question marks about the group going into 2023, right? Like I know that we know 3 out of 5 positions who the player is going to be, and then the guys that are competing for the other spots, you feel pretty good about the talent level that's going to be competing inside of guard too. So I think not only for the importance of Notre Dame football, but also for the talent you have coming back, I think that offensive line, very, very, very positive situation you're in there.
And what position do you think looks best for the future of Notre Dame football? That's a little harder to determine, which is a good thing.
I think I have an answer for that one, though.
Okay.
Just off the top of my head, it's probably going to be a little weird for some people, but I think the turnaround that you've had in the wide receiver room over the last couple of years is going to be tremendous for this team, because now that you have Sam Hartman and then the continued development of Tyler Buckner, you feel good about where the quarterback position is, which is another great answer to this one, by the way, because that's paramount to have great quarterback play. But I feel really good about the prospects of Tobias Merriweather, Deion Colsey, with the 2023 group, with Jaden Thomas, all of a sudden, from just a couple of years ago where you were, and just from last year where you were to where you are now, the wide receiver room has just done a complete 180 from a talent perspective and from a depth perspective. So I think wide receivers is going to be huge for the team moving forward.
I still got to see it, and I got to see another year of recruiting it well for just for me. I think my debate is it comes down to quarterback, because I'm extremely excited for the future of the quarterback room. Offensive line, obviously, and then the other linebacker is in a really good place. But the last one for me, Ryan, is corner, because that's a position that Notre Dame hasn't really been strong a lot of times, and that's one thing that the 80 to 93 teams had that a lot of other really good Notre Dame teams didn't, was they could run with you on the perimeter. And, offensive line, you kind of take that for granted a little bit. Linebacker, yeah, okay, Notre Dame's good at linebacker, sure. But they haven't always been really good at corner. I think they got a chance to be really good at corner the next few, 4 or 5 years if they keep doing what they're doing now. And so that's kind of where I'm at real quick. There's a debate going on in the chat about most players drafted all time. Notre Dame is still number one at 522.
Yep.
USC is next to 519. Third is Ohio State at 479. Fourth is Oklahoma at 409. Michigan's fifth at 392. So Notre Dame's by far. Notre Dame and USC by far have had the most players drafted.
Mm-hmm.
There's a pretty big drop off after that. So just a heads up to help kind of silence that discussion. Here's the next. I don't mean that just because it was debate and there was back and forth, and that just give the numbers to it, and it is what it is.
Yeah, Tommy Guns, with the recent trend of position groups that we're most worried about in the spring and fall continue to become a strength,
if not the strength of the team by season's end. So basically, like we've gone into years where really worried about corner, and it becomes a strength, if not the strength.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Running back, that kind of thing. So, so with the recent trend of a position group that we're, if not, so. Will the trend continue? Well, I guess it depends on what you view as the position group that you're most concerned about. I think defensive line is probably that. I could see that. I think defense. I mean, if you look at the chat, defensive line is a position group that most people are worried about. It would have been quarterback, but now it's Sam Hartman. And I think if you're going to say offensively, wouldn't you say that probably receiver is still the one that most Notre Dame fans are most concerned about on offense?
The unknown of it, yeah.
Right. Right, which is concern for me. I don't mean concern like, oh, they suck, there's no good players. But, yeah, I'm concerned. I'm concerned about that group more than any other group just because guys got to step up. And then defensive line, I'm more concerned about linebacker right now than I am defensive line, but for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say all three of those position groups have a chance to be a strength of the team. The problem is I just have a hard time seeing the receivers being better than the offensive line. So the strength, I'd have a hard time seeing that. Or same with the running backs. But it'd be nice. Yeah. Defensively, could I see the defensive line becoming the strength of the defense? Yeah, I could see that. I'm not predicting it. But let's say Jean-Baptiste is what we think he is. Let's say Botelho and Burnham have the breakouts we think. Let's say Riley Mills kind of finally has that breakout season. Let's say Howard Cross, Aiden Kanahana, Gabriel Rubio are able to lock down the nose.
Yeah, right.
And then a young guy or two steps up. Tyson Ford, Boubacar, Mookum, Brendan Vernon, Devin. Like one of those freshmen or sophomores steps up, and because that's where the most talented is my opinion, is the freshman sophomore next year's freshman and sophomore class.
Yeah.
But are they ready or not yet? That remains to be seen. So like one or two of those guys step up, then sure, the defensive line could become a strength. Linebacker to me could also become a strength, not the strength. I think the defensive line has a better chance of becoming the strength just because of the nature of the position, but they could all become that. It's just how much you're willing to bet on it at this point in time.
Yep.
So, yeah. Let's get to some of these. We're going to have to roll out of here pretty quickly, but I do want to try to rock and roll through as many of these as possible. So let's go to Brandon here.
Brandon's question is, Notre Dame still recruiting Aaron Butler, California kid who just decommitted from USC? Is Notre Dame recruiting him at cornerback because it seems like he might want to play offense? So, Brandon, yes, he was offered as a cornerback. He is on the cornerback board for Notre Dame. I haven't talked to Aaron recently as much as I had because he was committed to USC, but I think that they're still in contact with him, but
they have
as
still
far as-
recruiting him. They've
Yeah.
been recruiting him for a while, but the reality is he's not going to go to Notre Dame right now.
Right.
He's looking to go into the SEC or a school like that, and I think at the end of the day, he's probably looking for things that Notre Dame's not willing to offer at this point in time, including potentially playing offense. I think they like him at corner, but he's really good.
I like him at corner as well, though. I like him
Agree.
at corner as well. Yeah.
Agree.
He's talented.
We have a super chat down here, Ryan, from Chief Brody. Here, I have a few super chats we'll get to, but I wanted to address this one because I was a little puzzled by this one.
Chief Brody, thank you for the super chat. I'm more concerned about offensive line. I think that they have played poorly early in the last 2 seasons. I also think that if the O-line is good, the offense will score plenty of points to make up for the defense.
I think you could push back more than 2 years. I mean, they haven't played well early in most seasons, but I think pushing back beyond this year doesn't make a lot of sense because it's a different coach.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter. I think that this year's situation was understandable. And we talked about this during the offseason. How long is it going to take this group to get up and running?
Right.
And it took them about 2.5 games to get up and running. I mean, we knew that there was going to be some sort of – we hoped it would be the opener because of who they were playing. We always knew there was going to be some sort of transition period. I don't believe that carries over into next year, Ryan, for 2 reasons. Number one, you're set at tackle. Number 2, you're set at center. And number 3, you have Harry Heastan.
Yeah.
And when he's had veteran offensive lines, which he'll have next year, they've come out of the gate smoking. The 2015 offense came out of the gate smoking on offense. I mean, they destroyed Texas in the opener. The offensive line in 2016 came out of the gate playing well. I mean, they almost scored 50 points against Texas. The offensive line played well early in 2016. 2017, same way. They ran for like 400-some yards against Temple in the opener. So I think that was more of a Jeff Quinn problem than a Harry Heastan problem. This year was a transition problem, which was anticipated. You hoped it would have happened a little bit sooner, but Jared Pattis was banged up, and you were pretty young at tackle, and you had a new coach, and guys learned new positions. So it took them about 2.5 games to get rolling. I'd be real surprised. Plus, next year, Chief Brody, you're playing completely different type of opponents. Here's the reality: if Notre Dame would have played Navy in the opener, maybe they play a lot better. If they'd have played, trying to think of teams at BC in the opener, they probably would have looked a lot better. Yeah. Played Ohio State in the opener, and Marshall's a team that we told y'all was a pretty good football team coming into the year. And so next year's different. You got Navy, you've got Central Michigan, you got Tennessee State. You're going to have more of a time where if you're not completely 100% rocking and rolling, which they won't be, because that's the nature of the season, you're hardly ever as good in September on the offensive line as you are in November, right? And that rarely happens because you require some cohesiveness unless you've got like a bunch of dudes coming back. And in 2017, they had 4 starters coming back in 2017. Yeah. So, but it won't matter as much because who you're playing. And that's, in 2021, right? I mean, they're playing Florida State in the opener. Like, one of their DNs was a first-round NFL draft pick. Several NFL players on that group. So that factors into it as well.
Yeah. Well, and I would say that we've talked about this on the podcast pretty recently, that you're returning 3 starters. And, I mean, would you rather have 3 starters coming back than your 2 tackles and your center? Like, that's incredibly important. And I also think last year, Chief Brody, Brian talked about the transitional period coming back to Harry Heastan, which absolutely, right? But it's also – you thought Joe Alt was going to be this level of player, right? But you still had to see it fully, right? Because he wasn't a complete starter the year before. He came in and did an amazing job for what your expectations were, absolutely. But Blake Fisher had played a game and a half of football coming into the year. Zeke Correll in 2021 was a bad football player. Josh Luck had just played right tackle and had to make a transition. Jared Patterson was transitioning from center to guard and also didn't even play early in the season, the first game, until Marshall. So there were a lot of question marks coming into the season. You knew the potential was there, and I think that potential was realized during the course of the season toward the stretch. You saw how good this offensive line can be. But now coming into this year, you have more known commodities, man. Like Zeke Correll is a good starting center. Joe Alt just made unanimous All-American, right? Blake Fisher, I thought took a nice step forward. Consensus All-American. Sorry, my bad. Yep. Consensus All-American. Blake Fisher played some good football throughout the course of the year, and he's only going to improve from there because he's still got a whole
Blake
lot
was
of untapped
really good in
potential.
November, in my opinion.
Yep.
Really good in November.
Yep. So you have the premier positions coming back. You have guys that took massive steps forward, and I just think there's more certainty in this unit than there was coming into this past season.
Agree. Next question is from Tyler Smith. Got another super chat from Tyler Smith. Tyler, thank you very much.
Yep. Tyler said, not a Notre Dame question, but it is a college football question. What do you think about Brian Hartline being promoted to offensive coordinator today at Ohio State? Did that happen? I missed that, actually.
I didn't see that, but I've seen several people ask about it. So my assumption is that it happened. Well, I mean, it was anticipated because Ryan Day has said that he was going to step away from play calling, and the previous offensive coordinator left. And so it was assumed that was going to happen, and apparently that happened during the show. So my thing is, Ryan, what do I think about it? It's a smart move. I mean, you needed to promote him. If you didn't promote him, then you'd run the risk of maybe him leaving.
Sure.
I don't think it changes things a whole lot. I mean, I still think Ryan Day is going to be heavily involved in that, and honestly – I think I would wonder if Brian Hartline is going to do as much as Ryan Day did, and honestly, I think that's probably a good thing if he doesn't. Look, whoever the offensive coordinator is, if he doesn't get back to running the football, Ohio State's going to have problems winning games because they showed against Georgia. You can throw the ball all over the field. At the end of the day, the team that could make stops and run the football and move the chains and do what they need to do, getting into field goal range, is the team that won those games. They just aren't balanced enough to win championships right now, in my opinion. And even in the years that they had good balance, they'd go away from it when it really mattered. And I think that's hurt them. And I just think they're not a real physical football team, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
That's got to change, in my view. And if it does, Ohio State could be scary good.
It can. I mean, but to your point, right? Like you had to make this move at some point because, I mean, Hartline's going to have a lot of interest from a lot
and
of
Kevin
schools.
Wilson also left. He's the new head coach of Tulsa. He was the previous offensive coordinator. It's Tulsa is where he went.
Yep. So, I mean, this move was kind of imminent at some point. It was just a question of when it would happen, right? Because you want to obviously keep Brian Hartline if you're Ohio State. I don't know, though, Tyler, because, I mean, look, Brian Hartline's a great coach, right? A great wide receiver coach. He's developed incredible wide receivers. He's recruited the position as well as anyone. But what is he going to look like as a play caller? I have no idea. I mean, I don't think anybody knows that. I would like to think, based upon the quality of coach that I believe that he is, that he'll be a darn good play caller. But until a guy calls plays, I don't know what they are. There's a lot of really good position coaches that aren't good play callers too. So
yeah. Oh, yeah. Kerry Coombs is an example of one.
Yep.
Kerry Coombs had a very long reputation of being a really good secondary coach, and he was awful.
Yeah.
As a coordinator. Awful.
Happens a lot, actually, but I mean.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it really does. It really does. We have another super chat here from Eric Takaki. Eric, thank you very much for your super chat.
Are you expecting any staff changes, or are we keeping everybody this year?
Honestly, I don't see anyone getting fired. Does that mean there could be staff changes? Sure. I mean, guys get other jobs. Thing here is it's not really something I'm comfortable talking about because a lot of it's projection. And I'll give you an example of why we don't talk about things like this. Is because, Ryan, look at what happened with our 3-3-5 conversation.
Yeah.
We said in a show very clearly, I could see them doing this. And then you run to Twitter and the message board in this chat, and all of a sudden it's Notre Dame's going to a 3-3-5. And so it's like if I said, well, I could see so-and-so going to the NFL this year, then all of a sudden within 48 hours, that's dominating the conversation. And I'm getting phone calls saying, dude, why are you saying that so-and-so is going to the NFL? I'm like, I never said that. So that's kind of why I don't really want to get into specifics. But look, turnover happens. It's very rare that your entire coaching staff comes back. Right. As of right now, I have heard nothing about anyone getting fired. But there's always going to be movement. There's always going to be somebody that decides to step away. Somebody decides to get in a different role. Like Trevor Mendelson got the O-line job at Western Michigan. So, that's an analyst role that needs to get filled. You could see some other thing happening, where somebody hires this guy or that guy and somebody goes to the NFL and, you can see all that. But as far as projecting it, I see that one as being one here. Ryan, I know you got to run to go pick up your daughter. Can I get one from you? Have you seen Darian Dupree yet, the running back?
I have seen
Darian Dupree. Let's pull him up real quick. We got this question from Brandon Plensner. I definitely think this is one that'd be good for you and I both to discuss before you have to run.
Yep. So Brandon asks, what do you guys think of Darian Dupree from Mount Carmel, who got offered today? Do you really see him as being the second running back in the class? Brandon, it's the second part of the question. I mean, there's other running backs on the board, right? So we need to see kind of how things are trending with guys like Corey Smith and Davion Goss and some other running backs that, Notre Dame has been on for a while now, right? So I don't know if he is the realistic running back too when everything is said and done. I will say this, though. I really like Darian Dupree, man. He's a tough little dude, man.
He's a typical Midwestern running back. He may not have the home run speed, but he's got great feet, great balance. He's physical as heck, Ryan. Like, there's some runs on his highlight tape. You're like, dude, he literally ran through the entire defense.
And he's only 190 pounds, man. It's wild.
He's built well, though. He's going to be 205, 210 when it's all said and done.
Yeah.
But he's got look, honestly, Ryan, if he was a little bit faster, I think he'd be a guy that people would be a lot more excited about. And as you know, my stance on speed at running back, I don't care. Yeah. But he reminds me a lot of as a back. You may disagree with this. Muhammad Ibrahim.
Oh no, I can see that. I can see that. Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
Because Muhammad's at Muhammad's peak, he's like 210 pounds, like you don't want him getting to like 220. Like he'll start to lose a little bit, but he doesn't have a ton of juice. But contact balance is stupid, man. That's the thing about Dupree.
Vision as a runner. Great. Like there's a play on his highlights where he literally like puts his hand right on the hip of the guard and just rides him until the defender commits and then he pops that sucker out. His feel for the game as a running back is really, really good.
I didn't even see I didn't look at what his weight was or when I watched him. I watched him like a couple weeks ago, I think, because Sean mentioned him on a show like a month ago, I think, that he had seen him in person, that he's a stud. And I watched him at first, man. I'm just like, this kid runs angry.
I kind of laughed when I heard Sean say that. I was like, okay, Chicago guy,
but
right. And then you watch him like, oh, my bad, Sean. This is why I shouldn't doubt my boy. This is why I shouldn't doubt my boy.
Brian, I literally thought he was like 200, 205 pounds watching his films. I'm like, that kid runs so physically. And then you're like, oh, he's only 190. That's interesting. That's very interesting.
But he can be nimble too, though, right? Yes. Like that. He's got a little bit of Audric in him, just not the body, but the knee, the lip. Like when he hits, his knees go flying up, and that's what you want to have, right? But he's also got some of the smoothness that Logan brings to the table.
Yeah, I think he is a smooth kid.
Similar to Logan as well. Which is not great. But as you saw in the bowl game, you don't need to be a 4.4 to rip off 75-yard and 40-yard touchdown runs. Right? You got time for one more because there's an NFL draft question about Foskey.
Of course.
So I'll read this, let you answer it from Lucas Dizon. Thank you, Lucas. Greetings from Germany. Thank you, my friend. I am wondering who is the best pro comparison for Isaiah Foskey. Foskey's a bit more power than speed and finesse, similar to Agba coming out of Oklahoma State. What are your thoughts?
That's an interesting one, Lucas. A guy that popped in my head pretty early was Zadarius Smith that played with the Minnesota Vikings. I think he's now with the Baltimore Ravens. He came out of Kentucky, and he was about 6'5", long arms, 260-plus pounds, but he's much more of a linear athlete, right? Like, I don't think he's bendy, and I don't think that Isaiah Foskey is incredibly bendy. Like, I don't think he's going to be an outside track dude that just runs under the table, right? Like, that's not his arsenal to me. But with the length, explosiveness, and power combination that Isaiah Foskey has, if a team can tap into him and really develop his pass rush plan, I don't think there's any reason that Isaiah Foskey can't be a double-digit a year sack guy. Like, I think he has that type of upside. It's just about the hand development, the nuance development, the pass rush plan development. And all those things are stuff that Zadarius Smith was incredibly raw coming out of Kentucky. But as a team kind of molded him a little bit, got him a little more wiser, then the length and the explosiveness took over. So Zadarius Smith might be a guy that I think Isaiah plays a little bit like, because he is kind of that linear, explosive, long guy, kind of like what Isaiah Foskey is.
Yep, I agree. Greg Lisman Jr. says, Brian and Ryan, which Notre Dame football game are you most looking forward to this upcoming season? I think it's an easy one, Ryan. It's September 24th, I think, is what it is, right, against Ohio State. Wait a minute. Let me look up the specific date of that one. Yep. It's whenever the Ohio State game is. It's September 23rd.
Yeah.
That's the first litmus test for Notre Dame.
Yeah,
I mean, if they start off 3-0 and blow out Navy and Tennessee State and Central Michigan, that's all great. I'll enjoy it. We'll talk about it, but it doesn't matter till September 23rd. If you're going to take that next step, eventually you got to beat one of those teams. You've beaten one of them. That's Clemson. But I would argue that that's as much about you ascending as them descending as it is you ascending, in my opinion. 100%. Beating Ohio State is a sign you're ascending because Ohio State's not taking a step back next year. They may not be as good at quarterback, but they're going to be better at other places. Their defense is going to be a lot better next year, in my opinion, than it was this year, especially with Tommy Eichenberg coming back. And that's what Georgia did. Georgia was an elite defense with an okay offense last year. This year, they were a really good offense with a defense that was a little bit up and down. Some weeks it was good, some weeks it wasn't, right? But the other side of the ball stepped up. That's how Ohio State's going to be next year, in my opinion, if CJ leaves. It's not like they're going to suck on offense. They're still going to be pretty good on offense. They got a lot of weapons at running back, a lot of weapons at receiver. They're going to need a new quarterback and a bunch of new linemen. They're not going to score 28 points a game. They're going to still be a really good offense. But their team could potentially be better because I think in year 2 of Jim Knowles, they're going to be a lot better on defense.
Agreed.
So that's the test. Can you beat them? You've got them on your home field. You've got a veteran court. There's no excuses. Can you get that done? That's the game that I'm most looking forward to the next season.
Yeah, and it's also the Midwestern power struggle too thing, right? I mean, it's great to beat Clemson, but
you can't be the best team in the country until you become the best team in the Midwest, man.
In the
you
region.
Know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Georgia didn't win national championships, so they said, "Hey, we can beat Bama." That was their kryptonite. I mean, they'd been in the SEC title, college football playoff before, and Bama was the team kept beating them.
Yep.
And then they finally stepped up and said, "Okay, if we want to be the big dogs, we gotta beat the big dog, right?" And they did last year. The title game.
And you're talking about a team, and Greg, I think, just said it in the chat as well, and it's true. It's big for recruiting because you're recruiting a lot of the same kids, right? 100%.
Yeah.
And then you're also, at the end of the day, Ohio State is still making playoffs, even when they're not playing particularly well at points, right? Like they weren't a great team this year, and they still made the playoffs, and they're still the threat to win a national championship. Gave Georgia about the best game that anybody gave them all year, right? I mean, Ohio State's a couple plays away from maybe being in the national title game. So at the end of the day, man, Ohio State is paramount to beat because of the Midwestern implication, because of the regional implication, but all the recruiting implication. And then they're one of the top dogs and have been for a few years. So you gotta take them down.
Ryan, there's a lot more questions I'd love for you to answer, but I don't want to get you in trouble. So I know you got to run. So I'm going to try to work through the rest of these here. Milton Fan 15 says, how is the Viper position changing? What type of player is ideal? 6'5", 250, 6'2", 230, etc. I don't think there is an ideal. Look, anytime you're a coach, you're going to say, give me a guy that's 6'3 plus, 6'4 plus. This just doesn't matter the position. That's long arms, that's really athletic, that's really fast. And I mean, that's what everybody looks for, right? It's not so much the player body type is what does the guy do? And so like Ryan and I talked about this, and I don't remember if we talked about it during the Javontae Jean-Baptiste, but the conversation he and I were having before the show started was, in a perfect world, Isaiah Foskey's not a Viper. He's playing big end in a perfect world. In the second part of the in what Notre Dame did this year, the second part of the question is it's even more true in what Marcus Freeman did in 2021. So part of it is what are they going to do? What do they want their defense to be, Milton Fan? Like, do they want it to be a true 4-down defense? And then you can get away with kind of having two big ends, and if one of them's a little bit twitchier and a better pass rusher like Foskey, you can put him over there. Or do they want to have a more hybrid 4-down, where you want a Josh Burnham type, you want a Jordan Patel type, more of a linebacker-ish, edge-ish type of guy that can rush the passer, that can set the edge effectively, but can also stack at linebacker, can drop into coverage, can do all those type of things. I think that's I think where the position is evolving. Now, if you can get a guy that's 6'5 and 250 can do that, great. If it's a 6'2", 230 guy that can do that, great. I think it's more about what does the guy do well is more important than what's his size. You know, we were talking about this yesterday with Isaiah Wynn from Georgia. I mean, that guy was a first-round draft pick. He was starting left tackle on Georgia's first playoff team. He was 6'2". No one's ideal for a left tackle, but he was pretty flipping good. So to me, it's more about what can the guy get done? If a guy can get things done and be taller, faster, longer, it's always ideal. But it's more about what he can do. And in this instance, you need a guy that can set the edge effectively. You need a guy that can be a good pass rusher, ideally with more than just one move. And you need a guy that, in my opinion, can zone drop effectively, meaning get underneath routes. It's one thing to just drop into coverage, but can you drop into coverage with purpose? I think that's a greater question. And Isaiah Foskey could do that if he was just running with a back. Like Isaiah Foskey is really good. We saw this at times, twice against Syracuse, and at other times is if he knew I got a back on a wheel, he could run because he just run. He wasn't a guy that was necessarily going to look up a curl and get up underneath the curl route. So if you can have a guy that can do something like that, I think that's where you're more effective, in my opinion. Good question. Adam Ziliak asks, Brian and Ryan, if the staff moves Riley Mills to 3 technique, does he reshape his body some to accommodate the move? I don't think he needs to reshape his body. I think he has some technical things to work on, to be a little bit come out of his. I think at times Riley gets a little high out of his stance. I want to see him just keep a little bit better pad level coming out, especially as an inside guy. I want to see him be a little bit better there. His hand play needs to continue to improve. His block destruction needs to continue to improve. So those are all technical things. I mean, he's already 2 inches taller than Jason Adamiola was, and at least 5 to 10 pounds bigger than what Jason Adamiola was. He was 292 this year. And if you see him up close next to each other, Riley's just a significantly bigger looking kid than Jason is. I mean, they're much bigger. So it's more about just reshaping his game more so than reshaping his body. Jeff Fluke says, love the Chicago Blitz. What other cities would you like to see the staff blitz? There aren't a bunch of other cities as much as it's states, but if I'm going to say a city, it's St. Louis. I mean, that's the other city I would say, hey, send 5 coaches down there over a 2-day period and go to every private school, every Catholic school, and the best public schools in St. Louis, and then the St. Louis surrounding suburb areas and right outside St. Louis. I think that needs to be an area that becomes a bit of a hotbed for Notre Dame. And I think this year was a great start. You've had really success the last couple of years, 3 years now. You got Gabriel Rubio, 21 class. You've got Tyson Ford in the 22 class. And then this year you got Christian Gray and Jeremiah Love. Next year you want to get Jeremiah McClellan. You want to try to get the Williams and Mary kid, who you're probably not going to get. You want to try to get Ryan Wingo. So if you can start building a pipeline into that city, that'd be huge for Notre Dame because there's some really big-time football players coming out of St. Louis right now. So that would be one. I mean, if you're going to talk about some others, maybe like Dallas would maybe be one if they wanted to kind of do something in LA, although I wouldn't waste a lot of time in LA. But Dallas is one that I would strongly consider. I do like a Jersey blitz. I think I'd do a Pennsylvania blitz, just get out to the best schools in Pennsylvania. It'd be more state related than it would be city related. St. Louis is the only other city. Maybe Dallas is the only other city where I could see that having some impact. And, they got 2 kids out of the Houston area. Isn't Frisco where Caleb Smith is? Isn't that? Oh, no, it's more like kind of Dallas-y, I think. But, Dallas, Houston would be other areas maybe potentially where you look at. But other than that, it's more so looking at states more so than it would be specific cities outside of St. Louis. 99 Problems BK1. The above question, would a third down rush package of Javontae Jean-Baptiste, Riley Mills, Howard Cross, Burnham, Botelho make sense? It wouldn't make sense to me. You got too many big guys in there. I'd say give me Mills and maybe Baptiste, or Mills and Cross, or Baptiste and Cross, like 2 of those big guys. Then give me Burnham and Botelho as a 4-man group. And then maybe Burnham or Botelho is. I would personally, for me, I would have Burnham come. I'd have Botelho coming off the edge, and I would have Burnham be sort of that Jason Adamiola player or Justin Adamiola player that kind of moves around, blitzes up the middle. Number one, I think Jordan Botelho right now is a more natural edge rusher. Even going back to his high school days, Burnham's still learning that. But the thing about Burnham is he's freaky long, and he's really quick downhill. So, and he played linebacker, so he would have a natural feel for that. So I'd have him as kind of be that either the Bo Bauer type or the Justin Adamiola type that's just kind of that moving around the inside on third down and just blitzing from somewhere, because you get a kid like that comes crashing into the guard, even if he doesn't win, get those long arms up, and all of a sudden he becomes a much harder guy to throw over. And so I would like to see something like that from him. I think that would be a really good third down package of some Botelho, Burnham, Mills, and some other bigger guy, because you don't want to be too small and then get run over. But, Mills, Cross, Mills, Baptiste, Cross, Baptiste inside, and then you get Battelle off the edge, and then Burnham can kind of move around. And then you could also just line them both up off the edge and bring them off the edge too. You could also do that. So that'd be a good one. And Jimmy McGill brought this up. This is a little bit different than the one from before, but what states, areas, schools does Notre Dame need to establish a recruiting hotbed in? St. Louis, Chicago, and Texas seem like obvious choices. They're all perfect choices. I think number one, Notre Dame seems to have gotten away from recruiting Catholic schools, and to a degree, I understand it because Catholic schools aren't what they used to be, where it was a bunch of Catholic kids. A lot of times Catholic school kids are just going there to get an education or play football or play sports or whatever the case may be. But I still think there's usually when you're talking about traditional Catholic schools, New Jersey, Ohio, a lot of states not named Florida or California, you're still getting a level of that kid is also coming from a different background or has own personal interests that are different, that maybe are more academically oriented, challenging him a little bit more than your typical public school kid may have from a stereotypical standpoint. So I would still make more priority on saying every year we're going to scour the Catholic school kids. I think a state that Notre Dame needs to establish as a hotbed in an area is, and they've failed to do so for years. I still think it's incredibly important for them to get into the DC, Maryland area. The fact that they can't, Jason Moore should have been the biggest slam dunk ever to Notre Dame, but they've done such a bad job in that area for years. Now they've gotten some kids from there, Cam Hart, Sam Mustipher, DJ Brown, but just a lot of those guys outside of Sam Mustipher, none of those guys were highly ranked guys. And Cam Hart wasn't it's not like they beat Ohio State and Michigan, who have really, and Penn State, who have done really well in that region for him or beat them for him. So DC is a big one. The DC Baltimore kind of private school, especially schools, is, think of who's come out of there recently. Caleb Williams, Jason Moore, Terrell Hall, all these kids that Notre Dame's not getting, that Ohio State, Penn State, Bama, and all these schools are getting. The Kajando brothers and went to Alabama. The fact that Notre Dame continues to just strike out year after year in that area is a problem, and it's not going to get fixed until you really make it a priority. And so I don't know if you can do all those at once. I'd say give me Chicago and St. Louis like right now. And Indy's another one. Like if a kid can get into school and a kid's from Indy, I'm looking at that kid. I may not take them all. Like I wouldn't have. I don't know if I'd have taken the Mickens kid this past year, but. Those are the areas where I'd want to get into first, right? Is to get the kids out of there. Fort Wayne, do your regional ones. And then after that, then I'm expanding a little bit, right? St. Louis is one of the regional ones too. Then I'm expanding a little bit. I'm going to Dallas. I'm going to DC. Like those are the first two that strike me. And then the next one is, I think North Carolina has got to be a big state for me in as well. I think it's an area where Notre Dame can and should have a lot of success. So you can't do it all at once. And so you've got to prioritize it. So priority number one for me is the Chicago, St. Louis, Indiana area. Once I feel I've got a plan in place for that, my next strategy, twofold strategy is DC on this end, and then the Dallas area on this end, which Notre Dame is already kind of starting to do a little bit with that area. But those would be my priorities at this point in time. So very, very good questions. Very good questions. We're going to have to wrap up here soon. I want to try to get through a few of these here that we haven't quite somewhat addressed in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So just give me a second as I kind of scroll through these and find out a little bit. So, but Basin Domer, I kind of think you're joking here, but what will Tommy's version of the slow mesh look like now that we have Sam Hartman for the coming season? They won't have a slow mesh next year. So yeah, that's not going to happen. All right, let me find out here real quick. Irish Mills, here's an interesting one. If Sam Hartman brings us a natty next year, where does he rank for all-time Notre Dame quarterbacks? Not very high. It's 1 year. Now, he would be memorable and he would be beloved if he plays a big role in that. But as far as like ranking him amongst the great all times, just because he brings a natty doesn't mean he's better than Brady Quinn was. It means he played on a better team than Brady Quinn played on. He's not going to be above Tony Rice and Terry Hanratty and Tom Clements and John Heward and Joe Theismann and guys like that. I mean, just one season in the Natty is great. Joe Montana is great. It's great. He'll be memorable. He'll be remembered and beloved. But you need more than 1 year to be that kind of guy, in my opinion. But good question. Good question. All right, let's see here. Milton Fan with a super chat. Thank you, Milton Fan. Why did Harry Hiestand leave last time? Simply put, he did not want to coach with Brian Kelly anymore. And I think that some of the recruiting stuff and, whatever, it's not worth it if I have to deal with this other stuff. Him and Brian Kelly didn't get along very well at all. There's never just like usually just one thing. It's usually a lot of things, but I'll just put it to you like this. If Brian Kelly is still the head coach of Notre Dame, there's no chance in heck that Harry Hiestand stays is at Notre Dame right now. None. Zero. And that means even if Brian Kelly would have fired Jeff Quinn and reached out to Harry, zero chance that happens. None. And so once he left, then Harry was interested in coming to Notre Dame again. I'll just leave it at that. But it's him and Brian Kelly were not on each other's Christmas card list, in my opinion, and from what I know about the situation. So that is definitely played a humongous role in that. All right, Brian Richmond with a super chat. Thank you, Brian. Any chance to stop the bag talk with 9 top 100 and an absolutely incredible portal season that likely isn't done? I fear a Goebbels effect. Well, I don't know. I mean, that's a pretty harsh example to use there when you consider what he did. But Brian, we don't really buy into that, right? Like there are some kids who you're going to need to pay to get to school here, and Notre Dame's not going to do that. Our pushback has always been not every kid is like that. And we know several Notre Dame kids who were offered pretty darn good money, money that a lot of people in this chat have told us is life-changing money to go to school, and they turned it down. So not every kid is like that. You've got to identify the right players. So look, but you're never going to stop that. Brian, I've been having this argument since I followed recruiting back in the early 2000s. And I know you're talking about me. I'm talking about fans, and this is where I'm leading into the fan talk. I started really following recruiting in late 90s, early 2000s. And even then, the talk was always, well, they can't recruit an elite level until they change the academics. They can't really recruit an elite level until, the boosters start getting more involved in paying players. They can't recruit an elite level until they get better facilities. They can't recruit an elite level until they get dorms with air conditioning. I mean, there's always some excuse for people. The reality is coaches that come here and work hard and are personable and have skill to recruit well. Simple as that. There's always excuses. And if it's not this, it's going to be something else. The reality is put a staff together that can coach and win games and work their butts off on the recruiting trail. And if those two things go together, that you start winning games and you start recruiting the way this program is capable of without the need for assuming that every kid wants to get paid, that assuming every minority kid from the Southeast that plays a skill position is not a great student or doesn't care about academics. Stop assuming all those things that aren't true and realize that there's a lot of kids from all over the country, from all different backgrounds, with all different parental structures, from all different type of high schools that view this as a place that can help benefit them for their future as men, as students, and as football players. And find those guys. And don't maybe waste as much time on some of the guys that you know are not that way. And so, like, credit to this staff for backing off of Samuel and Pemba when they did, because they got to the point where they're like, all this kid cares about is this, and that's not what we want. And so they backed off. More of that, and find the Jeremiah Loves, find the Jaden Greathouses, find the Braylon Jameses, find the Charles Jagasols, find those type of guys that are big time football players that care about NIL, but don't care about getting the guaranteed money because they find value in what you have to offer. Justin Scott's going to be that way. Justin Scott's going to care about NIL, as he should. We know this, but is he a kid that's looking for, give me this or I'm not coming? He doesn't seem to be that way. So find the things that work beyond that, because Notre Dame can compete in NIL with kids who care about NIL, but also don't care about the immediate guarantees. Notre Dame has and can compete with those kids because there's a lot of NIL opportunities in Notre Dame if it's a kid that's willing to do it the right way. Find those kids. Those kids are out there. And this notion that you've got to lower academic standards is insulting, The fact that you've got to pay players to come is insulting because it assumes that every kid is like that and every big-time kid is like that, and it's just not true. Not every kid that goes to Alabama gets bought. Not every kid that goes to Georgia gets bought. Not every kid that goes to Texas A&M gets bought. Not every kid that goes to LSU gets bought. And every kid that goes to USC gets bought. That's just not accurate. Some do. Not all. Find the kids that care more about the big picture. And I think what people are going to realize, and what Marcus Freeman has shown, is there's a lot more big-time players like that than people thought before. It's just about putting in the work to get there. And you look at the position where they're struggling to do that, are positions where you have coaches who aren't putting in the work. D-line, D coordinator. It's not a shock. Marcus Freeman didn't have those issues because he put in the work. Mike Elson didn't have that issue when him and Freeman were together because he put in the work. These guys aren't. Fix that, and you're gonna find yourself getting some big-time football players, which they already are, and that's going to be the key. All right, I think that is going to do it for today's show. Here's one that I want to get to because this has been asked several times, and this is a good one from Peter Freibert. John McNulty parted ways at Boston College after 1 year. Do you see him coming to Notre Dame as an analyst in some form based on his relationship with Tom Rees? I don't know if he will. I will say this: I would like to see it. I think that he's someone that Tom Rees trusts. He's someone that Tom Rees will listen to. As long as John McNulty's willing to work with the entire staff and be open and have that, and not just be kind of like Tommy Rees's, like, angel in his ear kind of thing, and work with everybody and take the ideas from everybody. I think that'd be a great idea because I think John McNulty is a very good football mind. I just don't think he was in a situation this year at Boston College where, he was kind of set up to fail. Brand new offensive line, and just your quarterback gets hurt, and your offensive line stinks, and your only good offensive lineman that has experience coming back gets hurt before the season starts. Your schedule's not good, and then your quarterback goes down for the year. You don't have the overall talent you have. Your defense isn't that good. There's a lot of things against them that didn't work. And I don't know if this is true or not, but there's also the notion that we've said before, and Ryan and I talked about this earlier, but not every good position coach, not every great mind from a talent standpoint is a position coach standpoint is necessarily a great coordinator. Maybe that's true of John McNulty. I don't know. I think 1 year's that struck me very much as Jeff Hafley kind of projecting blame onto others for his own failures and mistakes is how I view that one. But hey, that's kind of how it played out. So if John McNulty wanted to come back and be part of an entire group, work with an entire group, and I have no reason to believe that he wouldn't, I'd be all for bringing him back as an analyst. No question. He's a good mind. He's a very good mind, and the head and the OC trusts him. So I'd be okay with that. So anyway, that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. I really, really, really appreciate everybody for being with us today, and just all the great questions. And man, we could go for another hour and a half with all the great questions you guys put in. And honestly, my throat's getting going a little bit, so I got to go. And Ryan had to go pick up his daughter, but we'll be back at it. Sean and I, as of right now, plan on doing our RTCF show tomorrow. So we'll go at 2:00 tomorrow afternoon, as long as, some scheduling things don't come up. I don't anticipate it, but I just want to leave the ability for that to happen. But that's the plan as of right now. So we'll have our RTCF show. Hey, check out the site at irishbreakdown.com. If you have not done so, sign up for the newsletter. We send that out almost daily. Usually it comes out in the morning. Sometimes it comes out later in the day. So make sure you do that. Sign up for the message boards at irishbreakdown.com. If you're listening via podcast, give us a 5-star review. We'd greatly appreciate that. Our CFB Nation is really close to 4,000 hours. So if you all have not, if there's videos you haven't watched, I would greatly appreciate that you go back and watch some of those videos. We're really, really close. Like if we have a good week this next week of watch hours, we could get to 4,000, which will allow us to monetize that channel, which only allows us to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. And so that would be awesome. And then, of course, hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. And as we remember earlier, our buddy Tyler, who's a member of our IB family who lost his father, when the show's over, whenever it is this time that you sit down today or kneel down or however you pray, I would ask that you lift him up and his family up as they deal with that loss. I've never experienced that, and I hope I don't experience that anytime soon. But it's something at some point in time all of us do experience. And so just lift Tyler up. His dad apparently is a Notre Dame fan. And so just definitely keep him in your thoughts and prayers as you go through your weekend and as you spend your time with God. So Appreciate y'all so very much. This is such a great community. I absolutely love y'all and love this community so very much. It makes the long hours and hard work a lot more fun, knowing that you're doing it for a great group of people, and that's what we have here. So have a great rest of your day, everybody, and we'll talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.